My wife made me wait 4 hours at an expensive restaurant for my birthday dinner. When she finally arrived with her friends, she loudly said, "See, told you he'd still be here like a pathetic dog." They all laughed. We'd been together 4 years, and I'd just paid off her parents' mortgage. I smiled, ordered another drink. This morning, my phone shows 278 missed calls and her belongings are in garbage bags at the dump. So here's how it all started. And trust me, the irony isn't lost on me that it began with water damage. Because apparently, the universe has a sense of humor darker than my morning coffee and twice as bitter. It was a Tuesday in March, and Mother Nature had decided to throw one hell of a tantrum the night before. I'm talking about the kind of storm that makes you question your life choices while you're lying in bed listening to what sounds like God himself rearranging the furniture upstairs. The wind was howling like a banshee with commitment issues, and the rain was coming down so hard it sounded like someone was power washing the building with a fire hose. I should have known something was wrong when I woke up to what I initially thought was the world's most persistent alarm clock. Turns out, it wasn't my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was water dripping from my ceiling onto the hardwood floor with the rhythm of a really annoying metronome. Drip, 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 each drop landing with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Except instead of keeping time, it was keeping score of how royally screwed my security deposit was about to be. Picture this. Me, standing there in my boxer shorts and a faded college t-shirt that had seen better decades, staring up at a ceiling that looked like it had been through a blender. The paint was peeling in strips that hung down like sad party streamers, and there was a stain spreading across the white surface that looked suspiciously like the outline of either Florida or a very unfortunate birthmark. Water was cascading down in what I can only describe as an indoor waterfall experience that nobody asked for and certainly nobody wanted to pay for. I did what any rational adult would do in this situation. I stood there for a solid 5 minutes, coffee mug in hand, watching the disaster unfold like I was binge-watching a particularly depressing Netflix series. Then I grabbed every pot, pan, bucket, and Tupperware container I owned and turned my living room into what looked like a percussion section, having a nervous breakdown. That's when I called the building management, because apparently, I still had faith in the system back then. Cute, right? The guy on the phone. Let's call him Gary because he sounded exactly like every Gary who's ever disappointed you. Told me in the most monotone voice imaginable that they'd send someone over as soon as possible. In landlord speak, that translates to sometime between now and the heat death of the universe, but probably closer to the latter. 2 hours later, I'm sitting in my makeshift indoor rainstorm, working from my laptop because deadlines wait for no ceiling catastrophe, when there's a knock at my door. I opened it to find this contractor guy, built like he actually knew what tools were for, wearing work boots that had seen some serious action, and carrying a toolbox that looked like it could survive a nuclear apocalypse. His name tag said Tarek, and he had this apprentice with him who couldn't have been older than 22 and looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else on the planet. Tarek took one look at my ceiling and let out this low whistle that somehow managed to convey both professional assessment and personal sympathy. "Well," he said, scratching his beard, "that's not supposed to be doing that. Thanks, Captain Obvious. Really earning that contractor fee. But here's where the story gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean where my life took a left turn into crazy town without so much as a GPS warning. I'm standing there explaining the timeline of my ceiling's mental breakdown to Tarek when I hear this voice from the hallway. "Holy crap, Adrian, did your apartment finally give up on life?" I turned around, and there she was, Sloan Martinez from 4B, holding an armload of towels and wearing this smile that was equal parts amused and sympathetic. She lived 2 doors down, and up until that moment, our relationship had consisted entirely of polite hallway nods and the occasional, nice whether we're having small talk that neighbors excel at. But there she was, looking at my disaster zone with these bright green eyes that seemed to find the whole situation genuinely entertaining rather than tragic. She was wearing jeans that fit like they were specifically designed for her, and a sweater that was probably more expensive than my monthly grocery budget. But she was standing in my doorway offering help like we'd been friends for years. "You look like a man drowning in his own apartment," she said, and I swear to God, the way she said it made it sound like a compliment. There was this hint of a smirk playing at the corner of her mouth, like she was letting me in on some private joke that only the two of us understood. And you know what? She was absolutely right. I did look like I was drowning. Not just in the literal sense of being surrounded by water and chaos, but in that particular kind of adult drowning where you're technically keeping your head above water, but you're definitely not swimming. I was treading water in a life that was functional, but not exactly thriving, managing, but not excelling, existing, but not really living. Sloan handed me the towels. Good towels, the kind that actually absorb water instead of just moving it around, and started helping me strategically place them around the worst of the damage. She had this way of moving through the chaos that made it seem manageable, like she'd dealt with ceiling disasters before, or maybe just had one of those personalities that made everything seem less catastrophic by default. This happened to my friend's place last year, she said, expertly positioning a towel to catch a particularly aggressive drip. The key is to not let it become a thing, you know? Just another Tuesday adventure. She said it with this casual confidence that made me believe her, like she'd appointed herself the official spokesperson for turning disasters into anecdotes. While Tarek and his reluctant apprentice started doing whatever magic contractors do to fix ceiling situations, Sloan and I found ourselves in my kitchen, which was the only room not currently impersonating a water park. She made coffee, somehow finding my good mugs that I'd forgotten I owned, and we talked. Really talked, not the superficial neighbor chit-chat I was used to. She told me about her job at some marketing firm downtown, how she was working on campaigns for restaurants and local businesses, trying to help them find their voice in a crowded market. The way she talked about it, you could tell she actually cared about what she did, that it wasn't just a paycheck, but something she was genuinely invested in. She had opinions about everything. Which coffee shops had the best atmosphere for working, why certain restaurants succeeded while others failed, how the city was changing, and whether that was good or bad. I found myself talking more than I had in months, telling her about my job as a project coordinator for a mid-sized construction company. It sounds boring when you say it like that, and honestly, most days it was. I spent my time managing schedules, coordinating between different teams, making sure projects stayed on track and on budget. I was good at it, really good, actually, but it wasn't exactly the kind of work that made for exciting dinner party conversation. But Sloan listened like it was fascinating. She asked questions that made me realize I actually knew more about what I did than I gave myself credit for. She wanted to know about the biggest projects I'd managed, what happened when things went wrong, how I dealt with difficult clients and impossible deadlines. By the time Tarek announced that my ceiling was no longer an active water feature, I felt like I'd been reminded of who I was supposed to be. You should come by for dinner sometime, she said as we were cleaning up the towels and relocating my percussion section of water-catching containers. I make a mean pasta dish, and my kitchen actually has a ceiling that stays where it's supposed to. And that was it. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not earth-shattering, just a simple invitation delivered with that same slightly sarcastic smile that had greeted my ceiling disaster. I said yes before I'd even processed the question fully, because when someone like Sloan notices you, really notices you, not just the polite neighbor acknowledgement, but actual interest, you don't stop to analyze the lighting. You just bask in the warmth and try not to think too hard about what happens when the sun goes down. Looking back now, with all the wisdom that comes from spectacular relationship failure and the kind of hindsight that's sharper than a surgical scalpel, I can see all the things I should have noticed. But at the time, standing in my damp apartment with this beautiful, charming woman who'd turned my disaster into something that felt like the beginning of an adventure, I wasn't looking for red flags. I was just grateful that someone had shown up with towels and a sense of humor when my world was literally falling apart. Because here's the thing about meeting someone during a crisis. They feel like the solution, even when they're actually just another kind of problem wearing a prettier outfit. 8 months later, I learned that temporary is just another word adults use when they want to lie to themselves about making permanent decisions. Kind of like how we need to talk never actually means we need to talk. It means someone's about to get their emotional teeth kicked in. But hey, at least we're being civilized about it. It started with what I now recognize as the classic relationship bait and switch. Though at the time I was too busy being flattered by the attention to notice I was being played like a fiddle at a bluegrass festival. Sloan showed up at my door on a Thursday night looking like she'd been through an emotional blender, carrying a duffel bag that was clearly packed in a hurry and wearing that specific expression women get when they're about to ask for something they already know you're going to give them. "My roommate's having a complete meltdown," she said, dropping the bag at her feet like she was planting a flag. Some drama with her ex showing up unannounced, threatening to cause problems with her lease. "I just need a place to crash for a few days while she sorts her crap out. You know how it is." Here's the thing, I didn't know how it was. I'd been living alone for 3 years at that point, and I liked it. I had my routines, my space arranged exactly how I wanted it, my Netflix queue perfectly curated for one person's viewing habits. But when someone you're crazy about shows up looking vulnerable and asking for help, you don't exactly start questioning the logistics. You just move your stuff over and pretend like having someone else's toothbrush on your bathroom counter was always part of the plan. "Of course," I said, because apparently I'm the kind of guy who thinks being a human doormat is the same thing as being a good boyfriend. "Stay as long as you need." Famous last words, right up there with what could go wrong. And I'm sure it's nothing. Those few days turned into a week. The week turned into 2 weeks. By week 3, Sloane had somehow acquired a key, her own shelf in my medicine cabinet, and the kind of casual ownership over my space that would have been impressive if it wasn't so completely terrifying. She never officially moved in. There was no conversation about it, no mutual decision-making process, no discussion of rent or utilities or whose name would be on what. She just absorbed into my life like water into a sponge, until suddenly I couldn't remember what my apartment had looked like before her stuff was everywhere. And God, was her stuff everywhere. Designer handbags draped over chairs like expensive scarecrows. Skincare products that cost more than my monthly phone bill lined up on my bathroom counter like tiny soldiers in the war against aging. Clothes that required special hangers and specific folding techniques piled on every available surface. My minimalist apartment had been transformed into something that looked like a Nordstrom had exploded, and somehow I was supposed to pretend this was normal. But the real kicker was the couch situation. I had this perfectly good couch. Okay, perfectly good might be stretching it, but it was comfortable and it was mine. I'd bought it from a thrift store when I first moved in, and it had that broken-in quality that only comes from years of being someone's favorite place to collapse after a long day. It was brown corduroy with a few strategically placed patches and the kind of character that you can't buy in a showroom. Sloane took one look at it and made this face like I'd asked her to sit on a park bench covered in bird droppings. "Adrian, honey," she said, and I should have known right then that any sentence starting with honey in that tone was going to end with me spending money I didn't want to spend. "This couch has got to go. It's practically screaming college dropout who gave up on life." 2 days later, I came home from work to find my beloved corduroy companion gone, just vanished, like it had never existed. And in its place was this pristine white leather monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about people who don't actually live in their homes. It was beautiful, I'll give it that, but it was also completely impractical and approximately 10 times more expensive than anything I would have chosen for myself. "Surprise," Sloane said when I walked in, spreading her arms like a game show hostess revealing the grand prize. "I found it on sale, and I knew you'd love it. It's an investment in our future. Our future. Not the future or your future, but our future." Like she'd already decided we were a package deal, and I'd somehow missed the memo. And the thing is, I should have been bothered by the presumption. I should have asked where my old couch went, or who decided that our future required furniture that looked like it was designed for people who don't eat messy foods or own pets, or have any intention of actually using it for its intended purpose. Instead, I told myself it was motivation to raise my standards. Here was this incredible woman who saw potential in me, who wanted to help me become the kind of person who owned nice things and lived in spaces that didn't look like a college dorm room decorated by someone with no imagination and a tight budget. She was pushing me to be better, and if that came with the minor inconvenience of losing furniture I actually liked, well, that was probably just the price of growth, right? Wrong. So incredibly, spectacularly wrong that if wrongness were an Olympic sport, I would have won gold, silver, and bronze while setting a new world record. But at the time, I was still operating under the delusion that love meant letting someone remake you in their image. So I sat on the white leather couch that felt like sitting on a cloud made of anxiety, Because God forbid I should spill something or leave an indentation or otherwise evidence that a human being actually lived there. And I convinced myself that this was what progress looked like. The daily phone calls to her parents started around week 4 of the temporary arrangement. Every single night, right after dinner, Sloan would dial them up and put them on speaker like we were hosting some kind of family podcast. I'd be doing dishes or trying to read or just existing in my own apartment. And suddenly, I'm an unwilling participant in the Lawson family hour. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad." She'd chirp into the phone, settling into the white leather couch like she was settling into a throne. "Guess what Adrian did for me today?" And then she'd launch into these elaborate stories about my supposed romantic gestures. How I'd surprised her with coffee. I'd made coffee for both of us because that's what you do when you live with another human being. Or how I'd insisted on carrying her groceries. I'd help carry groceries because I have functioning arms and basic human decency. Or how I'd planned this amazing dinner. I'd cooked food because the alternative was starving. "Adrian treats me like a queen," she'd say, and her parents would make those approving noises that parents make when they think their kid has finally found someone who's going to take good care of them. And I'd be standing there in my own kitchen, holding a dish towel, feeling like I was watching a performance of my own life, where someone else was playing the lead role. The weird part was, I started to believe it. When someone constantly tells other people how wonderful you are, even if they're exaggerating your basic human decency into grand romantic gestures, you start to think maybe you really are that wonderful. Maybe I was the kind of guy who treated women like queens. Maybe I was boyfriend material after all. Then came the Friday night invasion. Sloan's best friends, Trent, Harper, and Naya, had apparently decided that my living room was their new favorite hangout spot. Every Friday, like clockwork, they'd show up with bottles of wine that cost more than my monthly streaming subscriptions combined and an expectation that I'd provide food, entertainment, and a clean space for them to hold court. Trent was one of those guys who managed to make everything sound like a critique disguised as a compliment. "Adrian, this pasta is actually pretty decent," he'd say, like he was surprised I could operate a stove without burning the building down. "You're like a little housewife, but with less complaining." Harper was the queen of backhanded observations. "It's so cute how you just let Sloan redecorate everything," she'd say, gesturing at my transformed living space with her wine glass. "Most guys would be all territorial about their stuff, but you're just so adaptable." And Naya, sweet Naya, who seemed nice enough, but had this way of asking questions that felt like tiny interrogations. "How long have you two been together now? It feels like you've been together forever. Are you thinking about making it official? You know, like really official?" I'd cook for them. Pasta, stir-fry, whatever I could manage on a project coordinator's budget stretched to feed 5 people instead of 1. And they'd critique it like food critics who'd been asked to review a gas station hot dog. Not mean, exactly, but with this casual expectation that I should be grateful for their presence and their opinions about my cooking, my apartment, my life choices. "Adrian's so good to me," Sloan would say, curled up on the white leather couch like a cat who'd found the perfect sunny spot. "He just takes care of everything. I'm so lucky." And I'd stand there in my kitchen, cleaning dishes that I'd cooked food in for people who treated my efforts like a barely acceptable baseline, telling myself that this was what having a social life looked like. This was what being part of a couple meant. I wasn't just Adrian, the project coordinator who lived alone and had quiet weekends anymore. I was Adrian, Sloan's boyfriend, the guy who hosted dinner parties and made sure everyone had enough wine and laughed at jokes that weren't actually funny. My buddy Kaido started asking questions around month 6. We were grabbing beers after work, and he had that look on his face that meant he was about to say something I probably didn't want to hear. "So," he said, picking at the label on his bottle like he was defusing a bomb, "you seem different lately." "Different how?" "I don't know, man. Tired maybe? Like you're working really hard at something that should be easier." He took a swig of his beer and gave me that look that good friends give you when they're trying to decide whether to mind their own business or stage an intervention. "You do everything for her, right? The cooking, the cleaning, the entertaining her friends, paying for stuff. What does she do for you?" It should have been an easy question to answer. In a healthy relationship, you should be able to rattle off a list of things your partner brings to the table without having to think about it. But I sat there for way too long, staring at my beer and trying to come up with something that didn't sound pathetic. "She chooses me," I finally said, and the words came out faster than I'd intended, like I was trying to convince myself as much as him. Kaido raised an eyebrow. That's it. That's not nothing, I said, getting defensive in the way people get when they know they're about to lose an argument. Do you know how good it feels to be chosen by someone like that? Someone who could have anyone she wants, and she picks me. But even as I said it, I could hear how hollow it sounded. Because being chosen isn't the same thing as being valued, and being wanted isn't the same thing as being loved. Though I wouldn't figure that out for another year and a half, when I'd be sitting alone in an expensive restaurant for 4 hours, finally understanding the difference between being someone's choice and being someone's option. That night, lying in my own bed next to someone who'd never actually asked to share it, I started doing something I told myself was just a weird habit from work. I began saving things, screenshots of texts, voice notes, little moments where Sloane's sweetness would slip and something sharper would show underneath. I told myself I was just being organized, keeping records the way I did with project timelines and contractor communications. But the truth was, I was already building evidence for a case I didn't know I'd need to make. Some part of me, buried deep under all the rationalization and wishful thinking, was keeping receipts for the life I was pretending I wasn't actually living. You know that saying about red flags looking like flags when you're wearing rose-colored glasses? Yeah, well, I wasn't just wearing rose-colored glasses. I was wearing rose-colored glasses, a rose-colored hat, and apparently a rose-colored blindfold, because I managed to miss warning signs that were bigger and brighter than a Vegas casino billboard advertising the apocalypse. The thing about Sloane was that she had this relationship with the word no that can best be described as allergic. Not just mildly uncomfortable, not just preferentially avoidant, but full-blown, breakout-in hives. Call the paramedics allergic. The woman could not handle being told no about anything, ever, by anyone. And I learned this the hard way through a series of increasingly uncomfortable episodes that I somehow managed to rationalize as passion and knowing what she wanted. Take her manager situation, for instance. This was maybe 2 months into the whole living arrangement that dare not speak its name, and Sloane had missed a deadline for some campaign she was working on. Not a huge deal, right? People miss deadlines sometimes. Life happens, priorities shift. Sometimes the dog eats your homework and you're stuck explaining to your boss why the quarterly marketing report looks suspiciously like chew toy remnants. But instead of just owning up to it like a functional adult, Sloane decided that the appropriate response was to record a 2-minute voice note that she sent to her manager at 11 o'clock at night. And because we were sharing our lives now, she played it for me like she was sharing a particularly amusing TikTok video. Marcus. The recording began, and I could already hear the venom dripping from her voice like honey mixed with battery acid. I got your email about the deadline, and honestly, I'm pretty disappointed in your leadership style right now. Calling out a team member for missing one tiny deadline when the client keeps changing their mind every 5 seconds makes you look like a clipboard clown who cares more about checking boxes than actual results. A clipboard clown. She called her manager, her boss, the person who signs off on her paychecks and performance reviews, a clipboard clown. I'm sitting there on the white leather couch that had replaced my perfectly good furniture, watching her pace around my living room like a caged tiger, and she's looking at me like she expects me to applaud this masterpiece of professional communication. Can you believe he had the audacity to question my time management? She said, flopping down next to me with the dramatic flair of someone who'd just survived a great injustice. I've been busting my ass on this campaign, and he's worried about some arbitrary deadline that doesn't even matter because the client is going to change their mind again anyway. I should have said something. I should have pointed out that calling your boss a clipboard clown might not be the best career strategy. I should have suggested that maybe, just maybe, when you miss a deadline, the appropriate response is, sorry, my bad, won't happen again, rather than launching into a character assassination disguised as feedback. Instead, I said something like, that does sound frustrating, because I was still operating under the delusion that being supportive meant agreeing with everything she said, even when what she said was completely insane. She saved the voice note to her phone, and somehow, without really thinking about it, I found myself saving a screenshot of our text conversation where she'd sent it to me first. Just habit, I told myself. The same way I saved important project communications at work. Totally normal. Nothing weird about keeping records of your girlfriend's professional meltdowns. But the manager thing was just the appetizer in the all-you-can-eat buffet of Sloane's inability to handle being told no. The main course came a few weeks later when her mother had the absolute audacity to refuse to co-sign a lease for some boutique space that Sloane wanted to rent. Now, I should probably mention that Sloane had been talking about opening her own marketing boutique since about week 2 of her temporary stay at my place. It was going to be this amazing creative space where she'd help local businesses find their authentic voice and tell their story in a way that resonates with their target demographic. Noble goals, right? Except that her business plan seemed to consist entirely of rent expensive space in the trendy part of town and figure out the rest later. Her mother, Mrs. Lawson, who seemed like a perfectly reasonable human being from the brief phone conversations I'd overheard, apparently had the nerve to suggest that maybe Sloane should wait until she had more experience, or perhaps start smaller, or possibly have an actual business plan before committing to a lease that cost more per month than most people's mortgage payments. Sloane's response to this maternal wisdom was to record another voice note, this one clocking in at nearly 3 minutes of pure, concentrated fury. She didn't send it to her mother directly. Oh no, that would have been too honest. Instead, she sent it to me like I was her personal emotional dumping ground, with the message, "Can you believe this? I cannot believe how small-minded my mother is being right now." The recording began, and I could hear her pacing around the apartment, her voice getting higher and more strained with each word. She acts like she's being financially responsible, but really she's just scared of success. She's scared that I might actually make something of myself instead of settling for some boring suburban life like she did. It went on like that for 3 full minutes. Her mother was small-minded. Her mother was holding her back. Her mother didn't understand entrepreneurship. Her mother was projecting her own failures onto her daughter's dreams. By the end of it, you would have thought Mrs. Lawson had personally set fire to Sloane's hopes and dreams instead of simply declining to co-sign a lease for a business that existed only in theory. "It's just venting," Sloane said when she saw my expression. "Everyone needs to blow off steam sometimes. I don't actually mean it. But here's the thing about words. They don't become meaningless just because you label them as venting afterward." And the way she said those things about her mother, the specific cruelty of calling someone who raised you small-minded because they won't bankroll your poorly thought-out business fantasies, that doesn't just evaporate because you claim you didn't mean it. I saved that voice note too, and the screenshot of her sending it to me, and the follow-up texts where she continued to rant about her mother's lack of vision and fear-based thinking. I told myself I was just keeping track of things the way I did at work, maintaining records for future reference. But really, I was starting to build a collection of evidence for something I couldn't quite name yet. Meanwhile, I was becoming the world's most dedicated fixer. Not in the cool, Harvey Keitel and Pulp Fiction way, but in the pathetic, enabling way that slowly erodes your sense of self until you're not sure where your problems end and someone else's problems begin. When Sloane complained about not having the right clothes for important meetings, I found myself offering to pay for a shopping trip. When she mentioned wanting to take some professional development courses, but not having the budget, I somehow ended up covering the tuition. When her resume needed polishing to better reflect her unique skill set, I spent my weekend using my professional contacts to help her rewrite it in a way that made her sound like a marketing genius instead of someone who'd missed deadlines and called her boss a clipboard clown. And through it all, I was watching her treat service workers like they were personally responsible for every minor inconvenience in her life. The waitress who took too long to refill her water glass got the eye roll and the heavy sigh. The barista who made her latte with regular milk instead of oat milk got a lecture about attention to detail. The delivery guy who buzzed our apartment instead of just leaving packages in the lobby got a passive-aggressive comment about following simple instructions. Each incident was small on its own. Nothing that would make you call the behavior police or stage an intervention. But they added up like drops of water wearing away at stone. Each little moment of casual cruelty chipping away at my ability to pretend that this was normal, that this was just how passionate people expressed themselves when they were frustrated. My neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, who lived in 4A and had the kind of quiet wisdom that comes from watching people make the same mistakes for 70-plus years, caught me in the hallway one afternoon as I was carrying up 3 shopping bags full of groceries and what looked suspiciously like another expensive handbag. "Adrian, she said in that gentle way that immediately lets you know someone's about to tell you something you don't want to hear. Can I share something with you? Mrs. Okafor was the kind of person you listened to when she wanted to share something. She'd raised 6 kids, been married for 47 years before her husband passed, and had the kind of perspective that only comes from surviving enough life to see the patterns that repeat themselves across generations. Of course, I said, setting down the bags because something in her expression told me this wasn't going to be a quick hallway exchange. A person who despises small people will never treat big love kindly, she said, and the words hit me like a gentle slap to the face. The way someone treats a waitress, or a delivery person, or their own mother when they think no one important is watching, that's who they really are, not the performance they put on for people they want to impress. I stood there in that hallway, surrounded by bags full of stuff I'd bought for someone who treated our neighbor's wisdom like an inconvenience, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Not enough to change anything, not yet, but enough to plant a seed of doubt that would eventually grow into something I couldn't ignore. She has high standards, I said, because apparently I was still committed to making excuses for behavior that didn't deserve excuses. Mrs. Okafor smiled the way people smile when they've said what they came to say and know that's all they can do. High standards for how people treat her, maybe. But what standards does she have for how she treats other people? I picked up those shopping bags and carried them upstairs to my apartment that no longer felt quite like mine, where Sloane was waiting to tell me about her day and all the various ways the world had failed to meet her expectations. I put away groceries I'd bought, organized them in cabinets that housed dishes I washed and cookware I used to make meals for people who critiqued my efforts like they were doing me a favor by eating them. And that night, as I was putting away the expensive handbag that was apparently necessary for some networking event that would advance her career, I found myself wondering when caring for someone had started to feel like a part-time job I hadn't applied for but couldn't quit. I was still saving the voice notes, the screenshots, the little pieces of evidence that painted a picture I wasn't ready to look at directly. My phone had become an archive of red flags that I kept folding up and putting away like laundry, telling myself I'd deal with them later, when I had time, when it was convenient, when I could figure out what they meant. But deep down, in the part of my brain that was still functioning independently of my heart's misguided optimism, I was starting to understand that I wasn't collecting these things randomly. I was building a case. Here's the thing about being someone's financial savior. It feels really good right up until the moment you realize you're not their hero. You're just their ATM with feelings and a credit score they can exploit. It was a Thursday evening in October when everything went sideways, and I should have known something was up because Sloane had been unusually quiet all day. Not the comfortable kind of quiet that couples develop when they're secure enough to exist in the same space without constant conversation, but the loaded kind of quiet that feels like a gun that hasn't been fired yet. She'd been checking her phone obsessively, typing messages and then deleting them, pacing around the apartment like she was rehearsing for a performance I wasn't supposed to know about yet. Then her dad called. Mr. Lawson was one of those genuinely decent guys who made you understand where Sloane had gotten her charm, even if she'd weaponized hers in ways that would have horrified him. He was a retired postal worker, the kind of man who still believed in handshakes and thank you notes, and showing up 15 minutes early to everything. When he called, his voice was shaking in that particular way that means a grown man is about to cry and trying really hard not to let it happen. "Sloane, sweetheart," he said, and I could hear him through the phone because she'd put him on speaker like she always did, turning private family conversations into public performances. "I need to talk to you and Adrian about something, and I'm not sure how to say this." That's when I learned about balloon payments, which is apparently what happens when you get a mortgage that seems affordable for a few years and then suddenly turns into a financial horror movie where the monster jumps out and demands a massive lump sum that you definitely don't have. The Lawsons had bought their house 12 years ago with one of those adjustable rate mortgages that seemed like a good idea at the time. Lower payments for the first few years, manageable monthly amounts that fit their budget when Mr. Lawson was still working full-time and Mrs. Lawson was bringing in steady income from her job at the school district. But now the balloon payment was due, and they needed to come up with $68,000 in the next 6 weeks or lose the house they'd been living in for over a decade. "We tried to refinance," Mr. Lawson explained, his voice getting smaller with each word. "But with me being retired now, and Linda only working part-time. The banks won't touch us. Our credit's good. We've never missed a payment. But apparently that doesn't matter when you don't have enough income to qualify for a new loan. I was doing the math in my head while he talked, running through my savings account, my emergency fund, my retirement contributions. It would be brutal, but it was possible. Barely possible, requiring me to liquidate basically everything I'd saved over the past 5 years and probably take out a personal loan for the difference. But theoretically doable if I was willing to put myself in a financial hole that would take years to climb out of. But before I could even process what I was thinking, Sloan was already turning to me with tears in her eyes that seemed to appear with the magical timing of a Broadway actress hitting her mark for the spotlight. "Adrian," she whispered, reaching for my hand like she was drowning and I was the only life preserver in sight. "If we help them now, they'll finally see me for who I really am. They'll understand that I'm not just their flighty daughter who can't stick to a budget. I'm someone who can solve problems, who can take care of family." The way she said "we" should have been my first clue. Not you, not "would you consider," not even "do you think it's possible," but "we." Like my bank account had somehow become community property during the Great Couch Replacement incident, and I'd missed the memo about joint finances. "We can do this," she continued, squeezing my hand with just the right amount of pressure to convey both desperation and confidence. "I know it's a lot of money, but it's family. It's the right thing to do. And imagine how good it will feel to know we saved their home." There it was again. "We." Like she was going to be writing half the check. I looked at Mr. Lawson's face on the phone screen, saw the shame and fear and desperate hope all mixed together, and I made the kind of decision that feels noble and selfless right up until you realize you've been played like a cheap guitar at a pawn shop. "Let me run the numbers," I said, and I spent the next 2 hours figuring out exactly how to destroy my financial stability in service of someone else's family emergency. The math was ugly. I'd have to drain my savings account completely, cash out most of my 401k, and take the early withdrawal penalty, and get a personal loan for about 15 grand to cover the rest. It would set me back years in terms of retirement savings, cost me thousands in penalties and taxes, and leave me with basically no financial cushion for emergencies. But it was doable. "I can make it work," I told them, and Mr. Lawson started crying actual tears of relief while Sloan kissed me like I'd just offered to move mountains with my bare hands. The paperwork took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of coordinating with banks and loan officers and financial advisors who all looked at me like I'd lost my mind when I explained what I was doing. 3 weeks of Sloan telling everyone who would listen about how her amazing boyfriend was saving her parents' house, how I was stepping up to be the kind of man who took care of family, how lucky she was to have found someone with such a generous heart. When the check finally cleared and the Lawsons officially owned their house free and clear, Mrs. Lawson hugged me so tight I thought she might crack one of my ribs. "You gave us years of breathing," she whispered in my ear, and for a moment, it felt like maybe I'd done something genuinely good with my life. Mr. Lawson shook my hand with both of his, looking at me like I'd personally delivered him from financial ruin, which I guess I had. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you for this," he said, and I could see that he meant it, that he was already trying to figure out ways to show his gratitude that would somehow match the magnitude of what I'd done. "You don't need to repay me," I said, because at that moment, seeing their relief and joy, it felt like the truth. "We're family now." But here's where the story takes a left turn into the kind of territory that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the person sharing your bed. The very next day, literally 24 hours after I'd signed over the better part of my financial future to save her parents' house, Sloan was having drinks with Trent, Harper, and Naya at some trendy rooftop bar that charged $18 for cocktails that came in mason jars. And because she'd started including me in the group text thread where they planned their outings, I got to read in real time as she described my mortgage heroics to her friends. "Adrian finally did the bare minimum for family," she wrote, and I had to read that sentence 3 times before it sank in. The bare minimum. $68,000, and the complete destruction of my financial security was the bare minimum. "Honestly, it took him long enough to step up," she continued. "I was starting to think he wasn't serious about us, but I guess better late than never." Trent's response was a series of laughing crying emojis followed by, "Maybe next time he'll spring for a second house, so they can have a vacation home too." Harper added, At least now you know he's not completely selfish. Progress. And Naya, sweet oblivious Naya, chimed in with, "That's so romantic. Nothing says true love like a mortgage payment." They were all laughing. About my financial sacrifice. About the fact that I gutted my savings account to help people I barely knew because the woman I loved had asked me to. About the bare minimum gesture of giving away money I'd spent 5 years saving. I sat in my apartment. The same apartment where Sloan was living rent-free, eating food I bought, sleeping in a bed I paid for, and I stared at that group text until the words started to blur together. I screenshotted the whole conversation and saved it to the growing folder on my phone that I was still pretending wasn't evidence of anything important. That night, when Sloan came home smelling like expensive cocktails and overpriced appetizers, she curled up next to me on the white leather couch and told me about her evening. "The girls are so impressed with what you did for my parents," she said, running her fingers through my hair like she was petting a dog that had performed a particularly clever trick. "They said I'm really lucky to have found someone so generous." I wanted to ask her about the bare minimum comment. I wanted to know how $68,000 qualified as taking too long to step up. I wanted to understand how my financial sacrifice had been transformed into a story about her good fortune in finding someone who would eventually do what was expected. Instead, I said something like, "I'm glad they approve," because I was still operating under the delusion that keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping the relationship. But late that night, lying next to someone who described my most generous act as barely adequate, I started to understand that I wasn't building a life with someone who valued my contributions. I was funding a lifestyle for someone who saw my sacrifices as the entry fee for the privilege of her company. The mortgage payment had felt like love in action. Turned out, it was just the cover charge for a show where I'd never be anything more than the guy in the audience, applauding someone else's performance of my own life. So here's how my birthday dinner became a masterclass in public humiliation, served with a side of expensive wine that I got to pay for while being roasted like a Thanksgiving turkey in front of a restaurant full of strangers. It started 3 weeks before the actual day, when Sloan announced that she was planning something really special for my 31st birthday. Not asked if I wanted something special, not suggested we might do something nice together, but declared with the authority of someone who'd appointed herself the director of my life events that she was taking charge of the celebration. "I've been thinking," she said, curled up on the white leather couch that had replaced my actual personality. "And you deserve something amazing this year. You've been working so hard, and after everything you did for my parents, I want to show you how much it means to me." She'd picked Meridian, which was this fancy-ass restaurant downtown that we used to drive past on our way to normal people places, the kind of spot where they don't list prices on the menu because if you have to ask, you probably can't afford to eat there. The kind of place that had a waiting list longer than most people's attention spans and required reservations made with the same level of planning usually reserved for space missions. "I know it's expensive," she said, running her fingers through my hair in that way that usually preceded requests for money. "But it's your birthday, and you only turned 31 once. Besides, after the mortgage thing, everyone knows you're responsible with money, so one splurge won't hurt." The way she said, "responsible with money," while suggesting I blow a week's salary on dinner was the kind of cognitive dissonance that should have set off alarm bells loud enough to wake the dead. But I was still operating under the delusion that love meant saying yes to things that made you uncomfortable if they made the other person happy. So I made the reservation for 8 p.m. on a Saturday, which meant calling in a favor with a client who knew someone who could get us a table. I bought a new suit because Sloan mentioned that this isn't really a jeans and button-down kind of place. I got my hair cut at an actual salon instead of the barbershop I usually went to because she suggested I should look the part for such a nice evening. By the time my birthday rolled around, I'd spent more money on the preparation for this dinner than I usually spent on food in 2 months. But I told myself it was worth it because Sloan was excited. And when someone you love is excited about making you happy, you don't complain about the cost of admission to your own birthday party. I showed up 15 minutes early because that's what you do when someone makes an effort to plan something special for you. I wore the new suit, complete with the tie Sloan had picked out, and I felt like I was playing dress-up as the kind of person who belonged in places like Meridian. The hostess was one of those impossibly elegant women who made small talk feel like a performance art, and she led me to a table that had a view of the city lights, and probably cost more per hour than I made in a day. Will anyone else be joining you this evening? She asked, arranging my napkin with the kind of precision usually reserved for origami competitions. Yes, my girlfriend should be here soon, I said, checking my phone to see if Sloane had sent any updates about her arrival time. Running late. Go in and get seated, her text said. Order me a glass of the Pinot Grigio. I'll be there in 20 minutes. 20 minutes turned into 45. 45 turned into an hour. The hostess started making return visits to check if I needed anything, and I could see the pity starting to creep into her professional smile. The waitress, a young woman named Jessica who was probably working her way through college, kept refilling my water glass with the kind of determined cheerfulness that made it clear she'd been trained to handle awkward situations with grace. Would you like to order an appetizer while you wait? Jessica asked after the first hour had crawled by like a wounded animal. I'll give her a few more minutes, I said, because optimism is apparently a terminal condition that I hadn't been properly treated for. By the second hour, other diners were starting to notice. I could feel their eyes on me, the solo guy in the expensive suit sitting at a table for two, checking his phone every 30 seconds like it might magically produce an explanation for why he was dining alone on what was clearly supposed to be a special occasion. The couple at the table next to me kept shooting concerned glances in my direction, the kind of looks you give to wounded animals on the side of the road. Hour 3 was when the pity really ramped up. Jessica had moved beyond professional politeness into genuine concern, asking if I was sure everything was okay, if there was anyone I needed to call, if maybe I'd like to order something to eat instead of just sitting there looking like a man who'd been stood up by his own life. She's just running really late, I said, maintaining the fiction that this was a minor delay rather than a complete abandonment. She'll be here soon. But I was starting to feel that special kind of humiliation that only comes from being publicly reminded of your own foolishness. The kind that makes your face hot and your chest tight, and your brain starts spinning out scenarios where you're the villain in someone else's story about why they couldn't be bothered to show up to the thing they planned. By hour 4, I had memorized every detail of that restaurant. The way the light caught the wine glasses at the bar. The pattern in the wallpaper that probably cost more per square foot than most people's rent. The sound the ice made when it shifted in my water glass, which had become the most reliable companion at my table for one. That's when Sloane finally arrived. But she didn't arrive alone, and she definitely didn't arrive apologetic. She swept into Meridian like she was making a grand entrance at a movie premiere, trailing her holy trinity of enablers, Trent, Harper, and Naya, behind her like she was a celebrity, and they were her entourage. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my new suit. Her hair was perfect, her makeup was flawless, and she was laughing at something Trent had said as they approached the table. She didn't even sit down before she delivered the line that would replay in my head for months afterward. See? She said, gesturing at me with a grin that could have cut glass. Told you he'd still be here like a pathetic dog. The words hit me like a physical slap. The table behind me, the couple who'd been shooting me sympathetic looks for the past 4 hours, went completely silent. The ambient restaurant noise seemed to fade into a ringing in my ears that made everything sound like it was happening underwater. Trent burst out laughing, that braying sound that people make when they're more interested in showing approval than expressing genuine amusement. Jesus, Sloane, he really is well trained, he said, sliding into the chair across from me like he belonged there. Harper was recording something on her phone, probably a story for Instagram about their fabulous night out, while Naya just looked uncomfortable, like she couldn't quite decide if this was funny or cruel. Adrian, honey, Sloane said, finally acknowledging my existence beyond the dog comparison. You look so serious. It's your birthday, you should be having fun. She reached over and squeezed my cheek like I was a child who needed to be cheered up, then turned to Jessica, who was standing there looking like she'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. He's watching his belly, so just water for him tonight. But we'll take a bottle of your best champagne for the table. I sat there, still wearing the suit I'd bought for this occasion, still at the table I'd reserved for what I thought was going to be a romantic dinner for two, and I watched Sloane hold court like she was the star of a show that I was paying to watch. They ordered appetizers and entrees and dessert, ran up a bill that would probably cover my grocery budget for 2 months, and the whole time I was invisible except when they needed someone to make jokes about. The worst part wasn't the humiliation, though that was pretty spectacular. The worst part was the moment when I realized that this wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding or a plan gone wrong. This was intentional. Sloane had planned this exact scenario. The 4-hour wait, the grand entrance with her friends, the public humiliation disguised as a birthday celebration. She had orchestrated my own emotional demolition like it was dinner theater. I memorized the shape of my wine glass that night. The way the light refracted through it, the weight of it in my hand, the sound it made when I set it down on the table. Because sometimes, when your world is falling apart in real time, you focus on small, concrete things to keep yourself from completely losing your mind. When the check came, and of course it came to me, because apparently being called a pathetic dog doesn't exempt you from paying for the privilege, I smiled. I ordered another drink. I paid for my 2 beverages and let them figure out the rest. And then I walked out of that restaurant and into the kind of clarity that only comes from being publicly humiliated by someone you love. The night air tasted like freedom, even though I didn't know it yet. The bathroom at Meridian had the kind of lighting that was designed to make you look like a movie star, but somehow it just made me look like a man who'd been emotionally mugged in public. I stood there staring at my reflection. Expensive suit, perfect haircut, face that looked like it had been slapped by reality and was still processing the sting. For hours, I'd sat in that restaurant for 4 goddamn hours like a trained seal waiting for someone to throw me a fish, and when she finally showed up, the fish was poisoned and served with a side of public humiliation that probably violated some kind of Geneva Convention about cruel and unusual punishment. But here's the thing about rock bottom. Once you hit it, the view becomes crystal clear. All the bullshit that looked like love from a distance suddenly comes into focus, and you realize you've been staring at a mirage this whole time, dying of thirst while convincing yourself you were drowning. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through the evidence I'd been collecting without really admitting I was collecting evidence. The voice notes were all there, filed away in a folder I'd labeled Sloane stuff, like I was keeping track of grocery lists instead of documenting a slow-motion character assassination. There was the clipboard clown, recording where she'd eviscerated her manager for the crime of expecting her to meet deadlines. I played it back, listening to her voice drip with contempt for someone who was just trying to do his job, and I wondered how I'd ever convinced myself that this was just someone venting frustration, instead of revealing their true character. Then there was the 3-minute masterpiece about her mother being small-minded for refusing to co-sign a lease for a business that existed only in Sloane's imagination. I'd heard it so many times I could recite it from memory, but listening to it now, in this bathroom that cost more to design than most people make in a year, I could finally hear what I'd been ignoring. This wasn't someone having a bad day. This was someone who genuinely believed that anyone who didn't give her exactly what she wanted was either stupid, selfish, or both. And then there were the texts. Oh, the beautiful, damning texts that painted a picture so clear I couldn't believe I'd been squinting at it for over a year. The group chat where my mortgage heroics had been described as the bare minimum. The private messages where she called Trent a barnacle who drinks my shine, while laughing at his jokes to his face. The casual cruelty directed at everyone from waitresses to delivery drivers to her own parents, all saved in neat little digital files that told the story of who I'd really been sharing my life with. I thought about Mrs. Okafor's words. A person who despises small people will never treat big love kindly. Standing there in that overpriced bathroom, staring at my reflection while my girlfriend held court at a table I was paying for, surrounded by friends who thought watching me get humiliated was prime entertainment, I finally understood what she'd been trying to tell me. This wasn't about one bad night. This wasn't about a birthday dinner that went sideways or a joke that didn't land right. This was about 4 years of systematically training myself to accept less and less respect while providing more and more resources, emotional and financial, to someone who saw my generosity as weakness and my love as something she was entitled to rather than something she should cherish. The guy in the mirror looked tired. Not just physically tired from sitting in a restaurant for 4 hours being treated like furniture, but soul tired from carrying the emotional weight of someone who'd never carried anything heavier than her own purse. He looked like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be valued, who'd gotten so used to being the supporting character in someone else's story that he'd forgotten he was supposed to be the protagonist of his own life. I texted Zuri, "Can you be outside in 10? My sister had been waiting for this call for 4 years. She'd never said, "I told you so." Never pushed too hard. Never made me feel stupid for loving someone who treated me like a convenience store that happened to have feelings. But she'd been there, watching me shrink myself down to fit into someone else's idea of what I should be, probably holding her tongue through 1,000 conversations where she wanted to shake me by the shoulders and remind me of who I used to be. I straightened my tie. The expensive tie that Sloane had picked out for the birthday dinner she'd turned into performance art about my own pathetic devotion. I looked at myself one more time, really looked, and I made a decision that felt like waking up from a 4-year nap. I was done being anyone's pathetic dog. I walked back to that table where Sloane was still holding court, where Trent was still making jokes at my expense, where Harper was still documenting their fabulous night out on social media, where Naya was still looking uncomfortable but not uncomfortable enough to say anything. I smiled at them, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes but covers a multitude of sins. "I need to make a quick work call," I said, because even in my moment of awakening, I was still too polite to cause a scene in public. I walked to the host's stand, where the elegant woman who'd seated me 4 hours earlier was trying very hard not to look like she'd witnessed a tragedy. I paid my tab. Just my tab, the 2 drinks I'd nursed through 4 hours of public humiliation. "The rest is theirs," I told her, nodding toward the table where my soon-to-be ex-girlfriend was living her best life at my expense. Then I walked out into the night air that tasted like the first breath you take after nearly drowning, and I finally understood the difference between being someone's choice and being someone's option. I'd been an option for 4 years, and I was done auditioning for a role in a show where I'd never be anything more than comic relief. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, I was about to serve up a 5-course meal that had been chilling in my phone for months, and every single bite was going to be ice-cold truth served on a silver platter of Sloane's own words. I got home around midnight to an empty apartment that suddenly felt like mine again. The white leather couch looked different somehow. Less like a monument to someone else's taste, and more like evidence of how thoroughly I'd let someone else redecorate my entire existence. But I wasn't thinking about furniture. I was thinking about that drawer in my desk where I keep everything organized, the same methodical approach to record-keeping that had made me good at my job and apparently excellent at documenting my own emotional demolition. I opened my laptop and started pulling threads, not breaking into anything, not hacking accounts or crossing any legal lines, just using what Sloane had already given me access to. The streaming accounts I'd been managing because she found all that tech stuff annoying. The cloud storage I'd set up when she complained about running out of space on her phone. The email address I'd helped her create for her boutique applications, complete with the password she'd asked me to remember because she couldn't be bothered with keeping track of another login. Funny how someone who treats you like personal tech support never stops to consider what kind of access they're handing over. The voice notes were all backed up to the cloud, organized by date like a timeline of casual cruelty. I had 4 years of evidence sitting there. Every rant about managers who expected professionalism, every character assassination of family members who wouldn't bankroll her dreams, every private conversation where she revealed what she really thought about the people she smiled at in public. I started with her manager, Marcus the clipboard clown. Found his email in her contacts, opened a new message, and attached the voice note where she'd spent 2 minutes explaining why expecting employees to meet deadlines was basically fascism. No commentary, no explanation, just her own words in her own voice, delivered directly to the person they were about. "Here's what your employee really thinks about your management style," I wrote. Simple, factual, devastating. Next up was Mrs. Lawson. Sweet Mrs. Lawson, who'd hugged me so tight after I paid off their mortgage, who'd whispered, "Thank you," like I'd saved her life, who had no idea her daughter had spent 3 minutes calling her small-minded and fear-based for the crime of being financially responsible. I attached the voice note to an email and wrote, "I thought you should hear what Sloane really thinks about your decision not to co-sign her lease." But the piece de resistance was for Trent, the barnacle himself. Mr. He's well-trained, who'd spent the evening laughing at jokes about my pathetic devotion while having no clue that Sloane had described him in private as a barnacle who drinks my shine. The same Trent who showed up every Friday to eat food I cooked and critique my hospitality like he was doing me a favor by gracing my living room with his presence. Since you seem to enjoy laughing at other people's expense, I wrote, I thought you might appreciate hearing what Sloane says about you when you're not around. 3 emails, 3 voice notes, 3 people about to discover that the person they thought they knew had been performing a completely different character for their benefit. Then came the part that felt like surgery, careful, precise, necessary. I went through every shared account and switched it back to just me. Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, Amazon Prime. All the little conveniences that had somehow become ours when they'd always been mine. I removed her access to my credit cards, canceled the reservations I'd been funding for restaurants and events and experiences that were apparently just opportunities for her to practice her contempt. But the clothes were what really drove the point home. 4 years of designer outfits, expensive handbags, shoes that cost more than my monthly car payment. All bought with money I'd earned and stored in closets I paid rent for. I started packing, and it was like excavating an archaeological site of my own financial stupidity. Every item told a story. The dress from when she needed something special for a work event, the handbag that was essential for networking, the shoes that were an investment in our image. 16 garbage bags. That's what 4 years of someone else's lifestyle looked like when you stripped away the romance and looked at the receipts. 16 heavy bags full of fabric and leather and metal hardware that had somehow been transformed into evidence of my love and generosity, when really they were just proof that I'd confused being an ATM with being a boyfriend. I kept the important stuff separate: IDs, documents, family photos, anything that was actually irreplaceable. I'm not a monster, just someone who was done being treated like one. Zuri showed up at dawn with her pickup truck and the kind of grim satisfaction that comes from watching someone finally take out their own trash. You sure about this? She asked, looking at the mountain of garbage bags piled by my front door. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said, and for the first time in years, that was actually true. We drove to the county dump in silence, the radio playing softly while the sun came up over a landscape that looked like possibility. When we got there, I watched a hydraulic compactor mash 4 years of fake luxury into anonymous debris, and it felt like watching someone else's life get compressed into the truth. Expensive garbage is still garbage. How do you feel? Zuri asked as we drove home through morning traffic that looked like freedom. Like I just took out 4 years worth of trash, I said. She smiled. About damn time. My phone started buzzing at 7:12 a.m., and it didn't stop for the next 12 hours. By noon, I had 278 missed calls and enough text messages to write a novel about the many creative ways people can beg, threaten, and bargain when their world suddenly catches fire from the inside. It started with Sloane, of course, because when you've spent 4 years being someone's personal crisis management team, they naturally assume you'll be available to manage this crisis too. The first few calls came rapid fire, back to back. The kind of frantic dialing that happens when someone realizes their safety net has developed holes they never noticed. When I didn't answer, the texts began. And watching them evolve in real time was like getting a masterclass in the 5 stages of grief, compressed into digital format and delivered with the manic energy of someone whose carefully constructed facade had just collapsed in spectacular fashion. Stage 1 was anger. What the hell did you do? Answer your phone right now. Stage 2 was bargaining. It was a joke, Adrian. You know I was just kidding around. You're being dramatic. Stage 3 was confusion. What did you send to my mother? She won't stop calling and crying. Stage 4 was panic. Why is HR calling me? What did you do at my job? And Stage 5? Well, Stage 5 never came, because acceptance would have required Sloane to acknowledge that her own words had consequences, and we were apparently nowhere near that level of personal growth. I made tea like it was a meditation. Earl Grey with honey, steeped for exactly 4 minutes, the same way I'd made it every morning for the past 5 years before someone else's chaos had started dictating my daily routine. I opened the curtains that had been closed more often than not during the Sloane era. She'd complained that morning light was aggressive and interfered with her sleep schedule, so I'd gotten used to living in dimness that matched my emotional state. The apartment looked different in actual sunlight. Cleaner, somehow. More spacious without all that designer debris cluttering every surface. The silence felt good, not empty, but full of possibility, like a blank canvas waiting for me to remember what I actually wanted to paint on it. Mrs. Okafor slipped a note under my door around noon, written in the careful handwriting of someone who'd learned cursive when it was still considered a necessary life skill. If you need food or quiet, knock. No questions, no judgment, just the kind of unconditional support that comes from people who understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop accepting unacceptable behavior. Around 2 p.m., I heard the unmistakable sound of someone pounding on my door like they were trying to break it down with their fists. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know it was Sloan. The rhythm was pure entitlement mixed with desperation, the kind of knocking that says, "I know you're in there, and I have a right to your attention." I sat on my couch. My brown corduroy couch that I'd rescued from storage after the white leather monstrosity had disappeared along with everything else, and I listened to her work through what sounded like the entire emotional spectrum in the span of 10 minutes. First came the demanding, "Adrian, open this door. We need to talk about this like adults." Then the pleading, "Please, just let me explain. You don't understand what you've done." Then the bargaining, "I know you're angry, but think about what we have together. Think about everything we've built." And finally, the card slipped under my door like a white flag of surrender, except it wasn't actually surrendering anything. I planned a surprise after the laughter. Why ruin everything? A surprise. After 4 hours of public humiliation, after calling me a pathetic dog in front of a restaurant full of strangers, after turning my birthday into performance art about my own devotion, there had apparently been a surprise waiting that would have made it all okay. The audacity was almost impressive. Zuri texted me a photo from the dump, the compactor crushing what looked like a designer handbag into unrecognizable fragments. The caption read, "Closure looks like this." I screenshotted it and added it to my growing collection of evidence that sometimes the best revenge is just refusing to participate in someone else's delusion about reality. But the call that really got to me came around 8 p.m., after most of the chaos had died down to a manageable roar. Mr. Lawson's number appeared on my screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. This was the man whose mortgage I'd paid, whose gratitude had felt so genuine that I'd convinced myself it was proof that good deeds were always rewarded with good people. "Adrian," he said when I finally picked up, and his voice sounded like it had been put through a blender. Not angry, not accusatory, just broken in the way that comes from discovering that someone you raised isn't who you thought they were. "Mr. Lawson," I said, because even in the middle of burning down my old life, I still had manners. "I don't know what to say," he continued. I heard what she said about Lindo and me, about the mortgage, about being small-minded, about." His voice cracked, and I realized I was listening to a father's heartbreak in real time. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Whatever else had happened, Mr. and Mrs. Lawson didn't deserve to discover their daughter's true feelings about them through a revenge email from her ex-boyfriend. "No," he said firmly. "No, don't you apologize. Thank you. Thank you for helping us when we needed it, and thank you for showing us who our daughter really is. I'm ashamed, Adrian. I'm ashamed of what she did to you, and I'm ashamed that we raised someone who could treat another person like that." He paused, and I could hear him breathing heavily, like he was trying to decide whether to say the next part. "I'll come get her important documents tomorrow," he said. "Alone. She's not welcome in my house until she learns how to treat people with basic human decency." After he hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and realized that sometimes the truth doesn't set everyone free. Sometimes it just shows people who they really are, and not everyone is ready for that revelation. But I was ready. For the first time in 4 years, I was completely, absolutely ready to be myself again. Watching someone's carefully constructed social empire crumble in real time is like watching a controlled demolition in reverse. Instead of everything falling down in a neat, predictable sequence, it's chaos spreading outward in all directions, taking down innocent bystanders and revealing the structural weaknesses that were always there, hidden behind a pretty facade. The first domino fell at Sloan's office, where Marcus the clipboard clown had apparently decided that listening to a 2-minute voice note about his management style was exactly the kind of feedback he needed to take immediate action. I found out about it through the professional grapevine. One of my clients knew someone who worked in Sloan's building, and word travels fast when someone gets called into HR for what basically amounted to a recorded confession of workplace insubordination. She got walked out. My contact told me over coffee, the way people share gossip that's too good not to spread, but too brutal to enjoy completely. Security escort and everything. Apparently, the voice note was just the cherry on top of a sundae they'd been building for months. Missed deadlines, attitude problems with clients, the whole 9 yards. The recording just gave them the excuse they needed to pull the trigger. I should have felt bad about that. I should have felt some twinge of guilt for potentially costing someone their livelihood. Even someone who'd spent 4 years treating me like a combination ATM and emotional punching bag. But honestly, all I felt was a kind of cosmic justice, like the universe had finally decided to balance the books. The boutique situation collapsed next, and that one was almost poetic in its swift brutality. Apparently, the lease she'd been so desperate to have her parents co-sign had involved meeting with some local business networking group. The kind of people who take reputation seriously and don't appreciate discovering that their potential new member had described family members as small-minded for refusing to bankroll what was essentially a vanity project with no business plan. We've decided to pursue other candidates for the space. The email read, according to Sloane's increasingly frantic text messages that I was screenshotting for my own entertainment. We feel it's important that our business community reflects the values of respect and professionalism that our neighborhood is known for. Translation: we heard your voice note, lady, and we don't want that kind of toxic energy anywhere near our strip mall. But the real satisfaction came from watching her social circle implode like a house of cards built on a foundation of mutual bullshit and artificial loyalty. Trent was the first to crack, and honestly, I should have seen it coming. When you build your entire personality around being the guy who makes cutting remarks about other people, finding out that someone's been making cutting remarks about you is like discovering your favorite weapon has been pointed at your back the whole time. The barnacle who drinks my shine comment had apparently hit him right in his oversized ego, because within 48 hours of receiving that voice note, Trent had gone from Sloane's biggest supporter to her most vocal critic. I heard about it through Harper, who had apparently decided that loyalty was optional when it came to someone who'd been talking shit about all of them behind their backs. He's telling everyone who'll listen that she's a fake and a user. Harper had texted me, and I could practically hear the glee in her digital voice. Says he always knew something was off about her, but kept quiet because he felt sorry for you. The revisionist history was almost impressive in its completeness. Suddenly, everyone had always known that Sloane was trouble. Everyone had seen the signs, but hadn't wanted to interfere in my relationship. Everyone had been secretly rooting for me to wake up and see what was right in front of my face. It was bullshit, of course. These were the same people who'd sat in my living room every Friday night, eating food I cooked and drinking wine I bought, laughing at Sloane's stories about difficult customers and unreasonable managers and small-minded family members. They'd been her audience, her enablers, her willing participants in the performance of her own victimhood. But now that the performance had been revealed as a lie, suddenly they were all critics who'd seen through the act from the beginning. Harper's Instagram pivot was particularly entertaining. One day she was posting group photos from their fabulous girls' nights, and the next she was sharing vague inspirational quotes about recognizing toxic people and protecting your energy from negative influences. The passive-aggressive artistry was almost impressive. People show you who they really are, read one post, accompanied by a sunset photo that probably took 47 tries to get the lighting just right. Sometimes the trash takes itself out. The irony of someone who'd spent months enabling Sloane's behavior suddenly positioning herself as the wise sage who'd seen through it all was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But that's how these things work. When the popular kid falls from grace, everyone suddenly remembers all the reasons they never really liked them in the first place. Naya was the only one who reached out directly, and her message was the kind of carefully worded communication that comes from someone who's trying to extract themselves from a social catastrophe without admitting they were ever part of the problem. "Hey Adrian," she wrote. "I just wanted to check in and make sure you're doing okay. I know things with Sloane got really complicated, and I hope you know that some of us were never comfortable with how things went down. Especially that birthday dinner thing. That was really not okay, and I should have said something. The battle cry of people who enable bad behavior right up until the moment it becomes socially unacceptable, at which point they discover they always knew it was wrong, but just didn't want to cause drama. But the real kicker came when Sloane tried to play the financial card, like she'd been holding on to some ace up her sleeve that would drag me back into her orbit through the sheer force of manufactured obligation. She sent me a photo of the restaurant bill from my birthday dinner, the one where I'd waited 4 hours to be called a pathetic dog in front of strangers, with a message that was equal parts desperate and delusional. You left us with a $400 bill. This isn't over. I looked at that photo for exactly 3 seconds before responding with a scan of my receipt, showing 2 drinks totaling $38. The rest is yours, I wrote back, the same words I told the hostess that night when I'd finally grown a spine and walked out of my own humiliation. The silence that followed that exchange was more satisfying than any argument could have been. She tried the mortgage angle next, threatening to undo the mortgage kindness, like she had some kind of legal claim to money I'd given her parents out of my own savings account. But apparently, even in her delusional state, she remembered that my name wasn't on any deed, and her parents weren't exactly taking her calls anymore after hearing what she really thought about their small-minded approach to financial responsibility. The final act in this drama came when Mr. Lawson showed up at my building to collect Sloane's important documents. I'd boxed up everything that mattered: birth certificate, passport, social security card, insurance papers, family photos that predated our relationship, and waited in the lobby like we'd agreed. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 days. His shoulders were slumped in the way that comes from carrying shame that isn't entirely yours but feels like your responsibility anyway. When he saw me, he tried to meet my eyes, couldn't quite manage it, then forced himself to look directly at me with the kind of determined honesty that takes real courage. I don't know how to apologize for what my daughter did to you, he said, accepting the box like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Linda and I, we keep asking ourselves where we went wrong, what we could have done different. You didn't do anything wrong, I told him, and I meant it. Sometimes people just turn out to be who they are, regardless of how they were raised. He nodded slowly, like he was trying to convince himself that was true. She's our daughter, and we love her, but love doesn't mean we have to pretend her behavior is acceptable. She's not welcome in our house until she learns to treat people with basic human decency. After he left, I realized I was witnessing something I'd never seen before: real consequences for someone who'd spent years avoiding them. No one was making excuses for her anymore. No one was enabling her behavior or explaining it away or suggesting that everyone else just needed to be more understanding of her passionate nature. For the first time in probably her entire adult life, Sloane was experiencing what happens when you burn bridges with people who matter, when you treat others like supporting characters in your own personal drama, when you assume that charm and manipulation can substitute for basic human decency. And I was finally free to be the protagonist of my own story again. 6 months later, I changed the locks. Not because I was still afraid she'd come back. Honestly, after the complete social and professional implosion she'd experienced, I figured she had bigger problems than trying to reclaim her place on my couch. But because changing locks felt like the final punctuation mark on a sentence I'd been writing for way too long. The white leather couch went the same week. I sold it online for about half what Sloane had paid for it, and the college kid who picked it up was so excited about getting real grown-up furniture that I almost felt bad taking his money. Almost. Then I drove straight to the same thrift store where I'd bought my original corduroy couch and found its spiritual successor, a brown microfiber sectional that looked like it had been designed by someone who actually understood that furniture should be comfortable first and Instagram-worthy never. It fit me like an old hoodie. Perfect. I rehung the cheap art that Sloane had quietly disappeared over the years, prints I'd bought from local artists, photography from trips I'd taken before my disposable income became someone else's lifestyle budget. My apartment started looking like a place where I actually lived instead of a showroom for someone else's taste. The money situation took longer to sort out. Rebuilding savings when you've nuked them for someone else's family emergency is like trying to fill a bathtub with a teaspoon. But I opened a new account and started funneling what used to be us money into me money. Turns out, when you're not bankrolling someone else's designer handbag collection, you can save a surprising amount of cash. Kaido dragged me back into the land of the living with Saturday morning five-side football. Running around a field with a bunch of guys who didn't know my relationship history and didn't care about anything except whether I could pass the ball was exactly the kind of therapy I needed. My legs remembered how to move without asking permission first. Zuri, bless her patient heart, made me try pottery because she said I needed a creative outlet that doesn't involve screenshots and revenge plots. I made a bowl so crooked it looked like modern art having an identity crisis, but it sits on my kitchen table now, like a small monument to the fact that some imperfect things are worth keeping anyway. I sleep 8 hours straight now. I cook meals for one person and eat them while they're still hot. I don't wait in restaurants anymore. If someone's running late, I order an appetizer and start without them, because my time has value and my hunger doesn't need an audience. When my birthday came around again, I made a reservation for one at a nice place downtown. Not Meridian. I'm not a masochist, but somewhere with good food and reasonable prices and waitstaff who don't look at solo diners like they're exhibits in a museum of human sadness. I ordered the steak, ate it before the candles burned down, and left a good tip. My phone still buzzes sometimes with numbers I don't recognize. I let it ring. I've learned that silence is a complete sentence, and I don't owe explanations to people who never asked for them when it mattered. If anyone asks for the short version now, I tell them this. My ex made me wait 4 hours at an expensive restaurant for my birthday, showed up with an audience, called me a pathetic dog, and expected me to pay for the privilege. I smiled, ordered another drink, went home, and ended the show. The morning after, there were 278 missed calls and her belongings were already becoming landfill. I didn't set out to ruin anyone's life. I just decided to stop letting someone ruin mine. Turns out, when you stop accepting unacceptable behavior, some people discover that their actions have consequences. Who knew? These days, I wake up in my own space, make my own choices, and remember what it feels like to be the protagonist instead of the supporting cast. It's a good feeling. I'd forgotten how good it could be. My wife texted, "I want a divorce. All communication through my lawyer." I replied, "Understood." Then I canceled her credit cards, trips, and cut all financial support. 24 hours later, her lawyer was frantically calling me. Look, I'm not saying Monday mornings are universally terrible, but they do have this special talent for kicking you in the teeth when you least expect it. There I was, standing in front of my bathroom mirror at exactly 8:12 a.m., doing the most mundane thing a human being can do, brushing my teeth. I had my electric toothbrush humming away like a tiny jackhammer against my molars, foam building up in the corners of my mouth like I was auditioning for a rabies awareness campaign, when my phone lit up on the counter. The buzz was innocent enough, the kind of notification sound that usually means someone's tagged you in a meme or your credit card company wants to remind you that yes, you did spend $47 at Taco Bell last Tuesday, and no, they're not judging you, but maybe you should be judging yourself. I glanced down at the screen, still mid-brush, still blissfully unaware that my entire existence was about to get drop-kicked into a different dimension. The message was from Sarah, my wife. Well, technically still my wife at that exact moment, though that status was about to have the lifespan of a mayfly. No cute good morning text. No, "Hey babe, can you grab milk on the way home?" Nothing normal. Just 8 words that might as well have been carved into stone tablets and delivered by a very disappointed angel. I want a divorce. All communication through my lawyer. I stood there, toothbrush still vibrating in my hand like it was trying to escape the sheer awkwardness of the situation, and I swear I could feel my brain doing that thing where it completely short-circuits. You know that moment when your computer freezes and the little rainbow just spins and spins? Yeah, that was happening inside my skull. Toothpaste started dripping down my chin in slow motion, and I'm pretty sure I looked like a discount version of the Joker having an existential crisis. No emojis. No explanation. No, "we need to talk," or "I've been thinking," or literally any other sentence that might have softened the blow. Just the emotional equivalent of getting an invoice in the mail. Except this invoice was for the complete demolition of everything I thought I knew about my life. For a solid 30 seconds, I just stared at those words. I read them once, twice, 3 times, hoping maybe autocorrect had seriously screwed up and she'd actually meant, "I want a diversity course," or "I want a devout horse," or literally anything else that made more sense than what I was reading. But nope, the words stayed the same. Divorce. Lawyer. End of discussion. It was like getting fired via text, except instead of losing a job, I was losing a whole person who allegedly loved me at some point. Probably. Maybe, I think. I finally shut off the toothbrush because the buzzing was starting to feel like a metaphor for the screaming inside my head, and I rinsed my mouth out while mentally calculating how many different ways a Monday morning could go wrong. I thought maybe I'd spill coffee on myself, or get stuck in traffic, or realize I'd worn 2 different shoes. You know, normal Monday disasters. Getting divorce texted while covered in Colgate was not on my bingo card. I wiped my mouth with the hand towel, checked my reflection, and saw a guy who looked exactly like me except his eyes had that 1,000-yard stare you usually only see in war documentaries. The thing about shock is that it makes you weirdly calm. Like your brain knows that if it lets you feel everything all at once, you'll probably just collapse into a pile of confused limbs on the bathroom floor. So instead it hits you with this eerie sense of detachment. I looked at my phone again. Read the message one more time. Then I did what any reasonable person would do when their spouse nukes their marriage via text message. I checked to see if she'd blocked me yet. She hadn't. Interesting. So she wanted the divorce, but still wanted to be able to see if I'd respond. Classic having your cake and eating it too behavior. Except the cake was our marriage, and apparently, she'd already decided it tasted like disappointment. By 8:27, I'd wiped the rest of the toothpaste off my face, splashed some cold water on my cheeks for good measure, and stood there gripping the edges of the sink like I was about to deliver a motivational speech to my own reflection. What was I supposed to do here? Beg? Cry? Call her? And ask what the hell happened between last night, when we were watching some terrible reality show about people renovating houses in Idaho, and this morning, when she apparently decided I was disposable? For about 5 seconds, I considered all of those options. Then I remembered something my dad told me once when I was 16 and got dumped by my girlfriend at a Dairy Queen. Son, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Also, never trust someone who orders their Blizzard upside down and then complains when it falls out. I typed back a single word. No paragraph explaining my confusion. No questions about why or how or what I did wrong. No desperate plea for reconsideration. Just one word that felt like closing a book I'd been reading for way too long without realizing the plot had stopped making sense chapters ago. Understood. I hit send and watched the little delivered notification pop up. There. Done. If she wanted it clinical and cold, I could do clinical and cold. I could out-detach her detachment. I could be so calm about this that historians would study my text message response in future relationship courses as an example of next-level emotional composure. Or maybe I was just numb. Hard to tell the difference at 8:28 on a Monday morning when your wife has just informed you via text that your marriage has the same status as a canceled Netflix subscription. Then something clicked in my brain. Not the sad, defeated kind of click. The strategic kind. The kind of click you hear in heist movies right before someone says, "I've got a plan." She wanted all communication through lawyers? Fine. She wanted to make this official and businesslike? Perfect. Two could play this game. Except I was about to play it with the efficiency of someone who actually reads terms and conditions and keeps spreadsheets for fun. I walked out of the bathroom, grabbed my laptop from the bedroom, and sat down at the kitchen table. My coffee from earlier was still warm, which felt like a small miracle in a morning that had otherwise gone completely off the rails. I opened my computer, cracked my knuckles like I was about to hack into the Pentagon, and launch what I would later refer to as Operation Freedom. It had a nice ring to it. Dramatic, sure, but when your spouse divorces you via text while you're battling plaque buildup, you're allowed a little drama. First stop, the joint bank accounts. We had 3 of them, checking, savings, and one we'd opened specifically for vacations that we never actually took, because Sarah always found something more important to spend money on, like another subscription box for artisanal candles or a yoga retreat in Sedona that cost more than my first car. I logged into each one, methodically and carefully, and did what any person protecting their assets would do. I didn't drain them. I'm not a monster. But I did freeze her access to the cards. All of them. Every single piece of plastic that connected to our joint finances got suspended faster than you can say marital assets. Within 20 minutes, I'd contacted the bank, explained the situation with the calm demeanor of someone ordering a sandwich, and had them issue new cards to my address only. Next up, the trips. Oh, the trips. Sarah had approximately 4 vacations booked over the next 6 months, all on the joint credit card, all to places I'd never agreed to go. There was the Bali Girls trip next week with her sister Lauren and 3 friends whose names I could never remember because they all looked like they shopped at the same Instagram boutique. There was a weekend spa retreat in Napa that cost more than my monthly car payment. And there was some kind of wellness festival in Costa Rica that involved sound baths and crystal healing and probably a lot of overpriced smoothies. I went through each booking, found the cancellation policies, and started clicking. Cancel, cancel, cancel. It was therapeutic, honestly, like popping bubble wrap, except each pop represented hundreds of dollars returning to accounts she could no longer access. The satisfaction was immediate and visceral. I imagined her trying to use her card at Starbucks later and getting that apologetic decline message. I pictured her opening her email to confirm her Bali flight and seeing the cancellation notice. I could practically hear the sound of her artisanal candles shattering in the background of whatever emotional meltdown was about to occur. And honestly, it felt good. Not in a cruel way, but in a natural consequences of your own actions kind of way. She wanted lawyers? She got lawyers. She wanted separation? She got separation. All the way down to the penny. By the time I finished my coffee and closed my laptop, it was barely 9:30 in the morning. I'd been divorce texted, emotionally processed, and financially strategic all before most people had finished their first meeting of the day. I sat back in my chair, looked around my kitchen, our kitchen, though not for much longer, and felt something I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. It wasn't happiness exactly. It wasn't sadness either. It was something else entirely. Peace. Actual, genuine, no strings attached peace. The kind of quiet satisfaction you get when you delete 200 unread work emails in one click and watch that little red notification bubble disappear into nothing. The silence that followed my morning of financial rearranging was, and I mean this sincerely, absolutely priceless. No arguments. No explaining. No justifying why I did what I did. Just me, my coffee, and the sound of my own breathing without someone asking me why I breathe so loud, or if I'm mad about something, or whether I remembered to take out the trash. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindictive. I just felt done. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and finally got permission to set it down. I looked at my phone one more time. No new messages. No, wait, I didn't mean it. Or we need to talk about this. Just that original text, sitting there like a tombstone for a relationship that had apparently died without me noticing. And you know what? I was okay with that. More than okay. I was ready. She wanted a divorce. She got a divorce. She wanted lawyers. She got lawyers. She wanted separation. Well, congratulations, Sarah. You got separation with a side of immediate consequences and a garnish of be careful what you wish for. I stood up, rinsed my coffee mug, and started getting ready for work like it was any other Monday. Because at the end of the day, that's exactly what it was. Just another Monday. Except this one came with a bonus plot twist and a masterclass in what happens when you underestimate the guy who pays attention to details, keeps receipts, and knows exactly how to click cancel on 11 different websites before 10 a.m. Game on, Sarah. Game on. By the time noon rolled around, I'd already accomplished more than most people do in a week, and I'm including people who actually have their lives together and use those fancy planners with the motivational quotes on every page. I'd gone to work, sat through a meeting about quarterly projections that I absolutely did not retain a single word of, responded to approximately 47 emails with the kind of professional efficiency that would make a robot jealous, and somehow managed to not mention to a single coworker that my wife had blown up our marriage via text message that morning. Greg from accounting asked me how my weekend was, and I said pretty good, caught up on some shows, which was technically true if you don't count the part where my entire existence got rearranged between brushing my teeth and my second cup of coffee. But the real accomplishment of the morning? I'd retained a lawyer. Not just any lawyer either. I'd gone straight for the big guns. Attorney Bruce Langford, a man whose reputation preceded him like a fog machine at a concert. I'd heard about Bruce through a buddy of mine who'd gone through a messy divorce 2 years ago and came out the other side with his house, his dog, and his dignity somehow intact, which in divorce terms is basically winning the lottery. My buddy had described Bruce as the kind of guy who smiles like he eats subpoenas for breakfast and washes them down with the tears of opposing counsel, which honestly sounded exactly like what I needed. I'd called Bruce's office at 9:47 a.m., right after my morning of financial reorganization, and his secretary, a woman named Diane who sounded like she'd heard every sob story in the book and was thoroughly unimpressed by all of them, had somehow squeezed me in for an 11:30 appointment. "You're lucky," she'd said in a tone that suggested I was anything but lucky. "Someone just canceled. Be here on time, or you lose the slot." "Yes, ma'am." I'd shown up at 11:23, sat in a waiting room that had leather chairs nicer than my couch and magazines from this actual month instead of 2019, and waited for my name to be called like I was about to see the principal. Bruce's office was exactly what you'd expect from a lawyer who charges more per hour than most people make in a day. Dark wood everything, law books lining the walls like he'd raided a library, and a desk so big you could land a small aircraft on it. The man himself was in his mid-50s, gray hair perfectly styled, suit that probably cost more than my wedding did, and these sharp blue eyes that looked like they could see right through whatever story you were about to tell him and identify the 3 parts you were lying about. He shook my hand with the grip of someone who'd never lost an arm wrestling match in his life and gestured for me to sit. "Mark, right? Diane said you've got a situation." He sat down, folded his hands on his desk like a movie villain about to explain his master plan, and waited. No small talk. No, "How are you feeling?" or "This must be difficult." Just straight to business, which honestly I appreciated more than any of the sympathy I'd been dreading all morning. I pulled out my phone and showed him the text. The divorce text. The one that had already become seared into my brain like a bad tattoo. Bruce read it, and I watched his face for some kind of reaction. Shock, sympathy, maybe even a wince of secondhand embarrassment. Nothing. The man had a poker face that would make professional gamblers weep with envy. He handed my phone back and leaned back in his chair, the kind of lean that said he'd seen this exact scenario about 400 times before. "And what did you do after receiving this?" he asked, his voice calm and measured, like he was asking me what I'd had for breakfast instead of how I'd responded to my marriage imploding. I told him everything. The frozen accounts, the canceled trips, the strategic separation of finances that I'd executed with the precision of someone who'd been waiting for an excuse to organize something. I explained about the Bali trip, the spa weekends, the joint credit cards that were now very much not joint. I showed him screenshots, timestamps, confirmation emails. I'd brought receipts, literal and figurative, and I laid them all out like I was presenting evidence at trial. Bruce listened to the whole thing without interrupting once, which was unnerving because most people can't go 30 seconds without interjecting with their own opinion or story about their cousin's neighbor's divorce. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, just looking at me with those sharp eyes, and I started to wonder if maybe I'd overdone it. Maybe I'd been too aggressive. Maybe I should have just curled up in a ball and cried like a normal person instead of going full financial lockdown before my morning coffee had even worn off. Then Bruce smiled. Not a big smile, but enough of one that I could see it. "You're calm," he said, like he was observing a rare species of bird. "I like that. Calm men are dangerous." I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning, but I decided to take it as the former because I needed a win today, and I'd take it wherever I could get it. Bruce started asking questions. When did we get married? Any kids? Whose name was on the house? What assets did we have? Were there any prenups? And I answered everything as straightforwardly as possible. No kids. Thank God. Because the idea of having to co-parent with someone who divorce texted me was nightmare fuel. The house was in both our names. No prenup, because we'd gotten married young and stupid and thought love was enough, which in retrospect was adorable and idiotic in equal measure. "Here's what we're going to do," Bruce said, pulling out a legal pad and starting to write notes in handwriting that looked like it belonged in a doctor's office. "You did the right thing protecting your assets. Don't touch anything else. Don't contact her. Don't respond to her family. Don't post anything on social media. I don't care if it's a meme about the weather, don't do it. Everything goes through me now. Understood?" "Understood," I said, which seemed to be my word of the day. "Good. I'll file a response to her petition. We'll start discovery, and we'll see what she's actually asking for. My guess? She's expecting you to roll over. People who send divorce texts usually are." He looked up from his notes, and that slight smile was back. They don't expect the other person to have their ducks in a row before lunch. I left Bruce's office at 12:14 p.m. feeling something I hadn't expected to feel, confident. Not happy, not sad, just confident. Like I'd hired the right person for the job and could actually trust someone else to handle the legal nightmare while I focused on not losing my mind. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat for a minute, and realized I was hungry. Not just regular hungry, but the kind of hungry you get when you've had the most insane morning of your life and your body is like, hey, remember me? I need fuel and also maybe therapy, but let's start with food. I drove home to my house, which was still my house and would remain my house if Bruce had anything to say about it, and walked into a kitchen that felt different somehow. Quieter, emptier, but not in a sad way, just in a factual way. Sarah's coffee mug wasn't in the sink. Her laptop wasn't on the counter surrounded by 17 open tabs of online shopping sites. Her shoes weren't kicked off by the door in that way that always made me trip over them. It was just my space now, and I could do whatever I wanted with it. I made myself a turkey sandwich. Not because I'm some kind of culinary genius, but because turkey sandwiches are simple and reliable and don't require you to think too hard, which was good because my brain had already done enough thinking for one day. I used the good bread, the kind Sarah always said was too expensive, but I bought anyway because sometimes you need bread that doesn't taste like cardboard. I added lettuce, tomato, a little mayo, some mustard, and a slice of cheese that may or may not have been past its prime but smelled fine, so I went with it. No drama. No crying into my coffee. No standing in the kitchen wondering where everything went wrong. Just me, my sandwich, and a legal plan that was already in motion. I ate at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone and deliberately not looking at Sarah's Instagram, because that way lay madness and probably a lot of vague posting about betrayal or strength or whatever divorced people post about when they're trying to look philosophical. Instead, I opened up my banking app and looked at the accounts I'd reorganized that morning. Everything was clean, separated, organized. My money was my money. Her money would be her money once the lawyers figured out the split. No more joint anything except maybe joint custody of the Netflix account, and honestly, she could have it. I'd get my own. At 2 p.m., I did something that felt weirdly powerful. I logged into every subscription service we shared and started canceling. The spa membership that cost $200 a month and that I'd never used once because I'm not a hot stone massage and cucumber water kind of guy. Canceled. The meal kit delivery service that sent us ingredients for recipes we never cooked because we always ended up ordering pizza instead. Canceled. The premium streaming service that Sarah used to watch reality shows about people dramatically falling in love on tropical islands. Canceled. The airline frequent flyer account that was tied to our joint credit card and had enough miles banked for that Bali trip. I called them, explained there'd been fraudulent activity on the account, which wasn't technically a lie because I definitely hadn't authorized a girl's trip to Bali, and they froze everything pending investigation. Thank you for catching this, sir, the customer service rep said, sounding genuinely grateful that I'd caught the fraud. You're welcome, I said, and I meant it. I was very welcome. The most welcome I'd been in months. By the time I finished my sandwich and my afternoon of subscription cancellations, something had shifted. For the first time in years, and I mean years, plural, like at least 3 or 4, I felt something strange and unfamiliar creeping into my chest. It wasn't happiness exactly. It wasn't relief either. It was quiet satisfaction. The kind of feeling you get when you delete 200 unread work emails in one click and watch that notification number drop to 0. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you did everything right, everything smart, and everything necessary. I'd been divorce texted at 8:12 a.m., and by 2:30 p.m., I had a lawyer, a plan, and a turkey sandwich. If that wasn't winning, I didn't know what was. Tuesday, 2:17 p.m. I was in the middle of a relatively peaceful work-from-home afternoon, responding to emails about budget allocations and pretending to care about a PowerPoint presentation someone had sent me with the subject line, urgent, please review ASAP. Even though nothing in corporate America has ever truly been urgent except maybe that one time someone microwaved fish in the break room, and we had to evacuate. I had my laptop open, a fresh cup of coffee next to me, and I was actually starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I could get through one full day without my personal life exploding into a dumpster fire of drama and complications. That's when my phone rang. Not buzzed, not pinged, rang, with the actual ringtone I'd assigned to Sarah's family members, which was unfortunately the default iPhone sound because I'd never bothered to customize it into something more accurate, like an air raid siren or the Jaws theme. I looked at the screen and saw the name I'd been half expecting but fully dreading, Lauren, Sarah's sister, also known as the family megaphone. Also known as the woman who'd cornered me at Thanksgiving 3 years ago to tell me I wasn't supporting Sarah's dreams because I'd suggested that maybe starting a candle business called Wicked Good Vibes wasn't the most financially sound investment when we had credit card debt. I stared at the phone for a solid 5 rings, watching it vibrate across my desk like it was trying to escape, and I seriously considered letting it go to voicemail. But here's the thing about people like Lauren. If you don't answer, they just call back. And back. And back. They'll call 17 times in a row and then text you, "Are you okay?" Like the only possible reason you didn't answer is because you're currently being attacked by bears. So I took a deep breath, prepared myself for whatever verbal assault was about to come through my speaker, and answered. "Hello, Lauren. What the hell did you do, Mark?" Her voice came through so loud, I actually had to pull the phone away from my ear. I'm talking air horn levels of volume. She sounded like a sports commentator who'd just watched their team lose in overtime. Except the team was her sister, and the game was my marriage, and apparently, I was the villain who'd sabotaged the whole thing. I took a sip of my coffee, mostly to buy myself 3 seconds of time to formulate a response that wouldn't immediately escalate this into a full-blown screaming match. I did exactly what Sarah asked me to do, Lauren. All communication through lawyers. That's a direct quote, by the way. Would you like me to forward you the text? There was a pause on the other end, and I could practically hear her brain trying to process the fact that I wasn't immediately apologizing or begging for forgiveness or doing whatever it was she'd expected me to do. She's crying, Mark. She's been crying all day. She can't access any of her accounts. Her trip got canceled. She has no money. Then maybe she should text her lawyer, I said, keeping my voice as calm and level as someone ordering a sandwich at Subway. I'm not customer support. She wanted separation. She got separation. All the way down to the bank accounts. You're being cruel. Lauren's voice had reached that pitch that only dogs and dolphins can usually hear. She made a mistake. She was emotional. You can't just cut her off like this. Actually, Lauren, I can. And I did. And it's not cruel. It's logical. She said she wanted a divorce and all communication through lawyers. So that's what she's getting. Divorce and lawyers. It's like ordering a combo meal. You get what you asked for. I was being petty. I knew I was being petty. But honestly, after 24 hours of having my entire life rearranged, I'd earned a little pettiness. I'd earned a whole pettiness buffet. She didn't mean it like that. She just needed space. Then she should have said, "I need space," not "I want a divorce." Words mean things, Lauren. I know that's a wild concept, but when someone texts you, "I want a divorce," it's generally not code for, "Let's take a week to think things over." I could feel my blood pressure rising, which was annoying because I'd been so calm up until this point. I'd been the picture of composed rationality. But there's something about being told that you're the bad guy for following someone else's explicit instructions that really gets under your skin. Lauren huffed into the phone, one of those dramatic exhales that people do when they want you to know they think you're being unreasonable. You know what, Mark? You're being a child about this. A petty, vindictive child. And yet I'm the one who hired a lawyer and protected my assets instead of sending divorce texts at 8 a.m. like I'm breaking up with someone via post-it note. Funny how that works. I was done. Completely done. Look, Lauren, I appreciate you calling to yell at me. Truly, it's been a highlight of my afternoon. But like I told Sarah, all communication through lawyers. That includes her flying monkeys. Flying monkeys? Are you seriously? Have a great day, Lauren. Say hi to your husband for me. And I hung up. Just clicked the red button and ended the call like I was canceling yet another subscription service I didn't need. My hand was shaking a little bit. Not from anger exactly, but from that adrenaline rush you get when you stand up for yourself after years of just nodding along to keep the peace. It felt good. Scary but good. Like jumping off a diving board when you're not entirely sure how deep the water is, but you're already in the air, so there's no going back now. I set my phone down on my desk, face down, because I knew Lauren well enough to know she'd either call back immediately or text me a novel about how disappointed she was in me and how Sarah deserved better and blah blah blah. I didn't want to see it. Not right now. Maybe not ever. I went back to my laptop, tried to focus on the budget allocation spreadsheet that definitely still wasn't urgent despite what the email subject line claimed, and poured myself more coffee because this day required caffeine levels that probably weren't FDA approved. For about 45 minutes, everything was quiet. Peaceful even. I finished the spreadsheet, Sent it off with a note that said, "Per your request," even though nobody had actually requested it in those words, and started organizing my inbox by priority. Then, right as I was starting to relax again, my email pinged. Not a work email, a personal one. Subject line: urgent spousal financial interference. Oh, this was going to be good. I opened it and found a message from Sarah's lawyer. A guy named Richard Chun who I'd never met, but whose email signature had approximately 15 credentials after his name, like he was collecting letters of the alphabet as a hobby. The email was 3 paragraphs of legal jargon that basically boiled down to: your client has engaged in financial abuse by cutting off access to joint accounts and canceling shared expenses without notice or consultation, causing severe emotional and financial distress to my client. And if this continues, we'll be forced to pursue emergency injunctive relief. Financial abuse. They were calling it financial abuse. I read that line 3 times to make sure I wasn't having a stroke or hallucinating or somehow misunderstanding basic English. The woman who divorce texted me and demanded all communication go through lawyers was now claiming I was abusing her by following her instructions. The mental gymnastics required for that argument deserved an Olympic gold medal. I laughed. Not a little chuckle, but a full-on, head thrown back, nearly spilled my coffee laugh that echoed through my empty house and probably made my neighbors wonder if I'd finally lost it. Then I did what any reasonable person with receipts, screenshots, and a lawyer who charged by the hour would do. I hit reply, attached every single piece of evidence I had: bank statements, text message screenshots with timestamps, cancellation confirmations, the original divorce text in all its 8:12 a.m. glory, and wrote a response so polite and professional it could have been used as a template in a business communication course. Dear Mr. Chun, please find attached documentation showing that all account modifications were made in direct response to your client's explicit request for divorce and lawyer-only communication. The attached text message clearly shows her directive. All actions taken were to protect assets during a separation that she initiated. Additionally, you'll find confirmation that essential expenses including groceries were maintained and delivered to her residence. I have CC'd my attorney, Bruce Langford, for his review. Best regards, Mark. I copied Bruce on the email, hit send, and sat back in my chair feeling like I'd just submitted the final paper for a class I was definitely getting an A in. The documentation was flawless. The timeline was clear. The evidence was irrefutable. I'd done everything by the book. Her book, specifically, the one where she wrote the rules, and I just followed them to the letter. Bruce replied 5 minutes later. 5 minutes. The man was either glued to his email or had some kind of lawyer sense that tingled whenever someone sent him something good. His response was 2 words: outstanding. Do absolutely nothing else. I didn't need to be told twice. I closed my laptop, finished my coffee, and spent the rest of the evening doing exactly nothing related to my divorce. I watched TV, a documentary about deep-sea creatures that was weirdly calming because at least those fish had their lives figured out. I made dinner. Pasta with Jared sauce because I wasn't trying to be Gordon Ramsay, just trying to eat something that wasn't a sandwich. I even did laundry, which felt weirdly therapeutic in a look at me being a functional adult kind of way. That night, I slept like a retired hitman. You know that sleep where you're out before your head fully hits the pillow and you don't wake up once until your alarm goes off? That kind of sleep. The kind of sleep you can only get when you know, deep in your bones, that you did everything right and the other person has absolutely no ammunition left to use against you. No guilt, no second-guessing, no lying awake wondering if you overreacted. Just pure, uninterrupted, blissfully dreamless sleep. When I woke up Wednesday morning, I checked my phone out of habit. No missed calls from Lauren. She'd apparently given up after the first attempt, which was shocking because that woman had the persistence of a telemarketer with a quota to hit. No emails from Richard Chun. No text from Sarah. Not that I expected any since she'd made it very clear we were doing this through lawyers. Just my regular morning notifications, weather forecast, a reminder about a dentist appointment next week, and a news alert about something happening in Congress that I definitely didn't have the energy to read about. I got up, made coffee, and stood in my kitchen looking out the window at a perfectly ordinary Wednesday morning. Birds were chirping. The sun was coming up. The neighbor across the street was walking his dog like he did every morning at exactly 7:15. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. And for the first time since Monday morning at 8:12 a.m., I felt something that wasn't shock or strategic planning or caffeinated determination. I felt free. Wednesday morning started with the kind of peace I'd forgotten existed. No divorce texts. No screaming phone calls from in-laws. No emergency legal emails accusing me of crimes against basic human decency. Just me, my coffee, and the sports section of the news app that I scrolled through while eating toast like a completely normal person living a completely normal life. I was almost starting to believe that maybe the worst was over. Maybe Sarah and her lawyer had looked at the evidence, realized they had absolutely no leg to stand on, and decided to just move forward with a quiet, dignified divorce where we split everything 50-50 and never spoke to each other again, except maybe awkward nods at mutual friends' weddings 10 years from now. Yeah, that fantasy lasted until about 10:47 a.m. I was at work, actual work, in the office, because I'd decided that sitting at home was starting to make me feel like a hermit who'd forgotten how to interact with humans, when my phone buzzed with a text from Bruce. "Call me when you have a minute." Her lawyer reached out again. It's creative. Creative. When a lawyer uses the word creative to describe the opposition strategy, it's never good. It's like when a doctor says your test results are interesting, or when a mechanic says your car is making a unique sound. I excused myself from a meeting about marketing strategies that I wasn't paying attention to anyway. "Sorry, Janet. Your ideas about increasing social media engagement are fine, but my marriage is currently imploding," and stepped into an empty conference room to call Bruce back. "Mark," Bruce answered on the first ring, and I could hear the barely contained amusement in his voice. "So, Richard Chen called me this morning. Apparently, your wife is now claiming she has no groceries, no gas money, no internet access, and is basically being financially trapped in her apartment like some kind of prisoner." I blinked, stared at the wall of the conference room where someone had left a motivational poster that said, "Teamwork makes the dream work," in aggressive cursive. No groceries? No groceries. She told her lawyer she can't even afford basic necessities and that you've cut her off completely, leaving her destitute and unable to survive. Bruce paused, and I could practically hear him grinning through the phone, which would be a compelling argument if it were remotely true. "But it's not true," I said slowly, my brain already connecting the dots. "Because I literally scheduled a grocery delivery to her place on Monday afternoon. $200 worth of food. All her favorites. Organic everything because God forbid she eat regular peasant vegetables like the rest of us." "I know," Bruce said, and now he was definitely laughing. "Because you're meticulous and you keep receipts like you're preparing for an audit by the IRS and the FBI simultaneously. Do you happen to have confirmation of that delivery?" "I have a screenshot of the order, the delivery confirmation with a timestamp, and probably a photo of the bags on her doorstep because the delivery service sends those now." I was already pulling up my email on my phone, scrolling through to find the receipt. She's lying. She's straight up lying to her lawyer. Oh, I know she's lying. But here's the fun part. Her lawyer doesn't know she's lying. He called me all righteous indignation, talking about how his client is suffering and we need to remedy this immediately or they'll be filing an emergency motion for temporary support. Bruce sounded like he was having the time of his life. So I'm going to email him the delivery confirmation with the timestamp and the itemized list showing sparkling water, avocados, that fancy cheese that costs like $20 a pound, and everything else you ordered. I found the email and forwarded it to Bruce immediately. Sent. She's going to look ridiculous. She already looks ridiculous. But now she's going to look like a liar, which is much worse in front of a judge. Bruce was quiet for a second, probably reviewing the receipt I'd just sent. "Mark, you ordered her groceries before she even complained about not having groceries. You're either psychic or you're the most prepared divorcing spouse I've ever had." "I'm not psychic. I just know Sarah. She's great at creating problems that don't exist so she can be the victim of them." I walked over to the window of the conference room, looking out at the parking lot where people were living their normal lives, going to lunch, checking their phones, completely unaware that somewhere in this building a guy was fighting a grocery war with his soon-to-be ex-wife. Bruce said he'd handle it and hung up, leaving me standing there with my phone in my hand and a growing sense of bewilderment at how absurd this entire situation had become. We weren't fighting over custody of kids or a family business or some priceless heirloom. We were fighting over whether or not she had access to organic kale. This was my life now. This was what my marriage had devolved into. I went back to my desk, tried to focus on actual work, and failed miserably because my brain was now stuck on the image of Richard Chen opening Bruce's email and realizing his client had just made him look like an idiot. About an hour later, Bruce forwarded me the email chain, and it was absolutely glorious. He'd sent the grocery receipt with a subject line that just said client necessities, and included a polite message that basically amounted to, as you can see from the attached documentation, my client proactively arranged for groceries to be delivered to your client's residence, including organic produce, sparkling water, and various other items she regularly purchases. The delivery was completed on Monday at 3:47 p.m., as confirmed by the attached photo of the bags at her doorstep. Please let me know if you need any additional documentation regarding my client's continued support of basic necessities. The photo. Oh man, the photo. There was Sarah's doorstep, clear as day, with 4 reusable shopping bags filled with food sitting right there in front of her door. You could even see the organic bananas poking out of one bag. Bruce had really gone for the kill with that one. Richard Chen's response came 2 hours later, and it was about 3 paragraphs shorter than his previous emails. Thank you for the clarification. We'll review this with our client and follow up as needed. Translation: my client lied to me, and now I look stupid, and I'm going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with her about what no groceries actually means. I saved that email in a folder I'd created called Evidence because I had a feeling this wasn't going to be the last time Sarah decided that reality was optional and drama was mandatory. Then I did something that felt weirdly petty and satisfying. I ordered her another grocery delivery. Same store, same organic everything, another $200 worth of food. Because if she was going to claim she was starving, I was going to make absolutely sure she had enough avocado toast ingredients to last through the apocalypse. Later that afternoon, Katie texted me. Katie, the mutual friend who'd somehow gotten caught in the middle of this divorce despite her best efforts to remain neutral. She was one of those people who wanted everyone to just get along and couldn't understand why sometimes getting along simply wasn't an option. Her text was short and to the point. She says, "You're being cruel." I stared at that message for a good 30 seconds, debating how to respond. I could ignore it. I could send a lengthy explanation of everything that had happened. I could forward her the entire email chain with Bruce and Richard Chen so she could see exactly how cruel I was being by ensuring my soon-to-be ex-wife had access to organic groceries and sparkling water. Instead, I went with the simplest option. I'm just following orders. She said, lawyer only. I'm being obedient for once. 3 dots appeared, like Katie was typing a response. Then they disappeared. Then they appeared again. Then disappeared again. I could practically see her sitting there, phone in hand, trying to figure out how to navigate this conversation without making anyone mad. Finally, she just sent back a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. No commentary, no taking sides, just a thumbs-up that could have meant literally anything from "I understand" to "I give up trying to mediate this situation." Katie didn't reply after that. She probably went back to her normal life, where people communicated like adults and didn't divorce text each other at 8 a.m. or lie about grocery access to their lawyers. I didn't blame her for ghosting the situation. If I wasn't living through this, I'd probably distance myself from it too. Divorce brings out a weird side of people, and nobody wants to get caught in the crossfire when someone starts launching accusations about organic produce. I spent the rest of the workday actually being productive, which felt novel and strange after 3 days of legal chaos. I finished a project that had been sitting on my desk for 2 weeks. I organized my email inbox down to 0 unread messages. I even cleaned out my desk drawer and found like 6 pens that had run out of ink, a bunch of old receipts, because apparently I keep receipts for everything, not just divorce evidence. And a motivational stress ball someone had given me at a company retreat that said "squeeze the day" in faded letters. By the time I left the office at 5:30, I felt surprisingly normal. Like maybe I could do this. Maybe I could navigate a divorce while still maintaining my job and my sanity and my ability to order groceries like a functional human being. I drove home listening to a podcast about true crime because nothing makes your own life drama feel manageable like hearing about people who committed actual crimes instead of just marriage crimes. When I got home, I checked my email one more time, force of habit at this point, and saw another message from Bruce. Update. Her lawyer has gone suspiciously quiet. No more emergency motions, no more desperate phone calls. I think the grocery incident may have convinced them to take a different approach. Good work, keeping documentation. Good work, keeping documentation. That was my life now. Getting praised by my lawyer for being organized enough to prove I'd purchased organic groceries. I should put that on my resume. Skilled at maintaining detailed records of produce purchases during marital dissolution. I made dinner, chicken and rice, nothing fancy, just something that required me to actually cook and think about measurements and timing instead of dwelling on the absurdity of my current situation. While I ate, I thought about Sarah sitting in her apartment, surrounded by the groceries I'd ordered, probably crafting her next complaint to her lawyer. No internet access, maybe, or no streaming services. Or the apartment was too cold because I'd somehow remotely controlled the thermostat through sheer spite. The thing was, I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel vindictive. I just felt done. Like I'd been playing a game where someone kept changing the rules every 5 minutes, and I'd finally just stopped playing altogether. She wanted a divorce? Great. Here's your divorce with a side of organic groceries and documented delivery confirmations. She wanted to complain about being financially trapped? Cool. Here's $200 of food showing up at your door twice a week, whether you like it or not. I finished my dinner, washed the dishes, and sat down on my couch with a beer, just one, because I wasn't trying to develop a drinking problem on top of a divorce problem, and thought about how much quieter my house was now. Not sad quiet. Just quiet. Peaceful even. No one asking me why I was watching this show, or whether I'd remembered to do some chore I'd definitely forgotten about, or commenting on how I was sitting wrong on my own couch. Just me, my beer, and the satisfaction of knowing that somewhere across town, Richard Chun was probably having a very awkward conversation with his client about the importance of telling your lawyer the truth, especially when the other side has receipts. Literally. Thursday morning, 10:42 a.m. I was in the middle of a Teams meeting with people from 3 different departments talking about synergy and paradigm shifts and other corporate buzzwords that don't actually mean anything, but make everyone feel productive. My camera was on, I was nodding at appropriate intervals, and I perfected the art of looking engaged while mentally being somewhere else entirely, specifically wondering if I should get Thai food or pizza for lunch. That's when my phone, sitting face down on my desk just out of frame, started buzzing with that persistent vibration that meant someone was calling me, and they really wanted to talk. I glanced down and saw Bruce's name. Bruce didn't call unless it was important or entertaining, and at this point in my divorce journey, those two things had become basically the same. I did that thing where you pretend your Wi-Fi is cutting out, made an apologetic face at my webcam, and said, "Sorry guys, I'm losing connection. I'll catch up via email," before immediately closing the laptop and answering my phone. "Please tell me this is good news," I said, skipping the pleasantries because Bruce and I were past that point now. We'd entered that phase of our professional relationship where we could just get straight to it. "Oh, it's better than good news," Bruce said, and I could hear him trying not to laugh. "I'm forwarding you a voicemail right now. Put me on speaker and listen to it." I did what he asked, putting my phone on speaker and waiting while he sent the file. A few seconds later, it came through, and I pressed play. What I heard was Richard Chen's voice, except instead of the confident, slightly condescending tone he'd had in all his previous communications, he sounded like a man who'd just realized he'd walked into a surprise exam he hadn't studied for. His voice was shaky, uncertain, like someone trying to give directions when they're completely lost themselves. "Mr. Langford, this is Richard Chun calling on behalf of Sarah Peterson. I'm, reaching out because we need to discuss the current situation. My client has expressed some concerns about the ongoing financial arrangements, and we feel it would be beneficial to, renegotiate some of the terms we initially proposed. If you could please have your client contact me directly, or if you and I could speak directly, that would be greatly appreciated. This is somewhat urgent. Thank you." I listened to it twice, then a third time, because it was honestly that satisfying. The man sounded like he was calling from the Titanic after it had already hit the iceberg. "He wants to renegotiate," I said, stating the obvious, but needing to say it out loud to fully appreciate it. "He wants to renegotiate," Bruce confirmed, and now he wasn't even trying to hide his amusement. "Mark, do you know what that means?" "That means they cracked. They cracked faster than microwave popcorn. We're 4 days into this divorce, and they're already backpedaling. I sat back in my desk chair, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what I was hearing. For days. It had been exactly 4 days since Sarah had sent that text message while I was brushing my teeth, and already her legal strategy, if you could even call it that, was falling apart like a house of cards in a windstorm. What happened? I mean, besides the grocery thing, which was already pretty spectacular. Bruce made a sound that was half laugh, half snort. What happened is reality set in. Your wife thought she could text you "I want a divorce," cut off communication, and still have access to all the joint finances and lifestyle she's been enjoying. She thought you'd either beg her to come back or just roll over and keep paying for everything while she figured out her next move. She did not expect divorce mode you to also mean budget cut you. Budget cut me is very efficient, I said, because it was true. I'd spent years managing our finances, tracking expenses, making sure bills got paid on time, and apparently all that time I'd been training for this exact moment without even knowing it. So what now? Do I call him back? Do we negotiate? Absolutely not, Bruce said firmly. We do nothing. We've done nothing wrong. We have all the documentation, and they're the ones panicking. When the other side is spiraling, you don't throw them a rope. You let them keep spiraling until they're ready to have a real conversation about realistic terms. He paused, and I could hear him typing something on his keyboard. Her lawyer now realizes that his client expected drama and got discipline instead. She wanted you to react emotionally, and you reacted strategically. That's throwing them off their entire game. I thought about that for a second. Drama versus discipline. It was pretty accurate, actually. Sarah had always been the one who operated on feelings and impulses and grand gestures. She'd make big declarations about what she wanted or needed, and I'd spend the next week figuring out how to actually make those things happen in reality. She'd say, "I want to go to Italy," and I'd research flights and hotels and exchange rates. She'd say, "I want to start a business," and I'd create a budget and a business plan. She provided the vision. I provided the logistics. Except this time, her vision was a divorce, and my logistics involved making sure I didn't get financially destroyed in the process. So we just wait? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. We wait. We let them sweat. And when they come back with actual reasonable proposals instead of demands for $6,000 a month in temporary support, then we'll talk. Bruce sounded like a chess player who'd just put his opponent in check and was waiting to see how they'd try to get out of it. In the meantime, keep doing exactly what you're doing. Don't contact her. Don't respond to her family. Don't engage with the drama. You're winning by being boring, Mark. Keep being boring. Winning by being boring. That should have been depressing, but somehow it wasn't. It was actually kind of perfect. I'd spent years trying to be interesting enough, fun enough, spontaneous enough for Sarah. Meanwhile, boring, predictable, organized me was apparently the version that was most effective at navigating a divorce. Go figure. After I hung up with Bruce, I sat at my desk for a few minutes, just processing everything. The voicemail played again in my head. Richard Chin's shaky voice asking to renegotiate. The uncertainty, the barely concealed panic. 4 days ago, they'd come out swinging with accusations of financial abuse and emergency motions and demands for thousands of dollars a month. Now they were calling and asking to talk. The shift was dramatic, and it was entirely because Sarah hadn't thought I'd actually go through with it. She'd thought the divorce text was a power move, something that would make me scramble and beg and promise to change. Instead, I'd responded with "understood" and a series of strategic financial decisions that had apparently never occurred to her as a possibility. I opened my laptop and sent Bruce a quick email. Heard the voicemail. Hilarious. Let me know when they're ready to be realistic. In the meantime, I'll be over here being boring and organized. Then I actually went back to work, because unlike some people, I had a job to do and responsibilities to handle and a life that didn't revolve around creating problems just to see how other people would react. That night, I celebrated. Not in a big way. I wasn't popping champagne or throwing a party or doing anything that would end up on social media where Sarah's spy network of friends could screenshot it and send it to her as evidence of my cruelty. I just made myself a steak. A good one, too. Not the cheap grocery store kind, but an actual nice ribeye from the butcher counter that I seasoned properly and cooked to perfect medium rare. I made mashed potatoes from scratch, not the instant kind. I steamed some vegetables because I'm a functioning adult who understands the food pyramid. And then I sat down at my dining room table, alone, and enjoyed every single bite. While I ate, I put on Netflix. Not anything Sarah would have wanted to watch. No reality shows about people finding love on tropical islands or home renovation programs where couples argue about shiplap. I watched a documentary about space exploration, something I actually found interesting, and I didn't have to explain to anyone why I thought Mars rovers were cool or defend my choice of entertainment. The piece was so profound I almost felt guilty about it. Almost, but not quite. After dinner, I cleaned up my dishes, wiped down the kitchen counters, and made myself a cup of coffee because I'm one of those weirdos who drinks coffee at night and somehow still sleeps fine. I took my coffee to the living room, sat on the couch, and realized something that would have seemed impossible 4 days ago. I was happy. Not in a jumping up and down, shouting from the rooftops kind of way, but in a quiet, settled, this is actually okay kind of way. The apartment was quiet. Nobody was asking me questions or starting conversations during the good parts of shows or commenting on how I was sitting wrong on furniture I'd paid for. It was just peaceful. My phone buzzed with a text from my buddy Mike, the one who'd recommended Bruce in the first place. "How's it going with the divorce? You holding up okay?" I typed back. "Her lawyer just called mine asking to renegotiate. For days in, and they're already backing down. Bruce says they're panicking." Mike's response came immediately. "Ha ha ha ha. Told you Bruce was worth every penny. You doing the thing where you stay calm and organized?" Yeah, apparently I'm winning by being boring. That's the best way to win. Let me know if you need anything. Also, drinks this weekend if you're free. I told him I'd let him know and set my phone down, smiling at the idea of Mike's reaction to all of this. He'd been through his own divorce horror story, complete with a wife who tried to claim their dog as a dependent on her taxes and a custody battle over a timeshare in Florida that neither of them even liked. Compared to that, my situation was relatively tame. No kids, no pets, no timeshares. Just two people who'd apparently forgotten how to like each other, and one of them had decided to end it via text message like we were teenagers breaking up after prom. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and stood in my kitchen looking around at a space that was starting to feel more like mine and less like ours. The coffee maker Sarah had insisted we needed, even though the old one worked fine. The cabinet full of mugs from various vacations and gift shops. The refrigerator covered in magnets that said things like "Live, Laugh, Love" and "Good Vibes Only." I walked over and started removing magnets, one by one, dropping them into a drawer. If Sarah wanted them later, she could have them. But I was done living in a space that looked like it had been decorated by a Pinterest board having an identity crisis. That night, I went to bed at a reasonable hour, set my alarm like a responsible adult, and thought about Richard Chin's voicemail one more time. The shakiness in his voice. The uncertainty. The barely concealed, "oh crap, what do we do now" energy. They'd expected me to fall apart, and instead I'd just handled it. Like an adult. Like someone who understood that when someone tells you they want a divorce, you don't argue or beg or try to change their mind. You say, "Understood." You protect yourself, and you move forward. I pulled up my phone one last time before going to sleep and saw that Bruce had sent me another text. "Sleep well. Tomorrow we do absolutely nothing," which is somehow the most powerful move we can make. I smiled, set my phone on the nightstand, and closed my eyes. Somewhere across town, Sarah and Richard Chun were probably having frantic conversations about strategy and next moves and how to handle the fact that I wasn't playing by their script. Meanwhile, I was here, in my quiet apartment, sleeping like someone who'd just won the opening round of a fight he didn't even want to be in. Winning by being boring. I could live with that. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a courtroom that looked exactly like every courtroom you've ever seen on TV, except smaller and way less dramatic. No jury box full of citizens doing their civic duty. No gallery packed with reporters scribbling notes. Just a handful of people waiting for their own legal proceedings. A bailiff who looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. And me in a suit I'd bought specifically for this occasion, because Bruce had told me, "Dress like you're going to a job interview for a position you actually want." So there I was, navy suit, blue tie, looking like someone who had their life together, even though internally I was running through a mental checklist of everything that could possibly go wrong. Bruce sat next to me, looking completely relaxed in that way that lawyers do when they know they're holding all the good cards. He had his briefcase open on the table in front of us, papers organized into color-coded folders because apparently I wasn't the only one who found comfort in excessive organization. He'd spent the last 2 weeks preparing for this hearing like he was prepping for a murder trial instead of a temporary support motion, and I'd provided him with enough documentation to build a fort. Bank statements, expense reports, text messages, grocery receipts, cancellation confirmations. Everything was there, time-stamped and categorized and ready to be deployed like legal ammunition. At exactly 2:47 p.m., the door on the opposite side of the courtroom opened, and Sarah walked in with Richard Chun trailing behind her, looking significantly less confident than he'd sounded in those early emails. But Sarah, oh man. Sarah had dressed for this hearing like she was attending a funeral for our marriage and wanted everyone to know she was the grieving widow. Black dress that probably cost more than my suit. Oversized sunglasses even though we were indoors and there was literally no sun to block, and this tragic sigh she let out as she sat down that was so performative I half expected someone to yell "cut" and reset the scene for another take. She looked over at me exactly once. I didn't look back. Bruce had been very clear about courtroom etiquette. Don't engage, don't react, don't give them anything they can use. You're Switzerland, neutral and financially stable. So I kept my eyes forward, hands folded on the table in front of me, doing my best impression of someone who was completely unbothered by the entire situation. Which, honestly, wasn't that hard because at this point I was more curious than emotional. I wanted to see how this was going to play out. I wanted to watch reality crash into Sarah's version of events like a freight train hitting a car stuck on the tracks. The judge walked in, Judge Patricia Morrison, according to the nameplate on her bench, and everyone stood up in that automatic way you do in courtrooms and when the principal walks into the classroom. She was probably in her late 50s, gray hair pulled back in a professional bun, reading glasses perched on her nose, and this expression that suggested she'd seen every ridiculous thing humanity had to offer and was thoroughly unimpressed by all of it. She sat down, we sat down, and she immediately started flipping through the paperwork in front of her with the speed of someone who'd read thousands of these filings and could spot the nonsense from a mile away. All right, Judge Morrison said without looking up. This is a motion for temporary spousal support in the matter of Peterson versus Peterson. Mr. Chun, you're representing the petitioner. Mr. Langford, you're representing the respondent. Mr. Chun, you filed this motion. Let's hear it. Richard Chun stood up, adjusted his tie in that nervous way people do when they're about to say something they're not entirely confident about, and launched into his argument. Your Honor, my client has been left in a position of severe financial hardship following the respondent's unilateral decision to freeze all joint accounts and cancel shared expenses without warning. She currently has no access to funds, no means of supporting herself, and is unable to maintain the standard of living she enjoyed during the marriage. We're requesting temporary support in the amount of $6,000 per month until the divorce is finalized. $6,000. I kept my face neutral, but internally I was doing math. $6,000 a month was $72,000 a year, which was more than a lot of people made at their actual jobs. For someone who allegedly couldn't afford groceries and had no means of supporting herself, that seemed like a pretty specific and aggressive number. Judge Morrison looked up from her papers, peering at Richard Chun over her reading glasses in a way that immediately made him look like he regretted every choice that had led him to this moment. Mr. Chun, it says here that the respondent has continued to provide for basic necessities including food and utilities. Is that accurate? Well, Your Honor, there was one grocery delivery, but 2. Bruce said calmly, not even standing up. 2 grocery deliveries, Your Honor, totaling approximately $400 in organic produce, protein, and essentials. Both delivered directly to the petitioner's residence with photographic confirmation. Judge Morrison made a note on her papers. All right, 2 grocery deliveries. What else, Mr. Chun? Richard Chun shuffled through his papers, and I could see him trying to find solid ground to stand on. Your Honor, my client has no access to the joint credit cards, no ability to make purchases, and no means of. Because she requested all communication go through attorneys, Bruce interjected, still sitting down like he was commenting on the weather. As evidenced by the text message sent to my client on the morning of November 13th at 8:12 a.m., which I've included in our response filing. The exact wording was, I want a divorce. All communication through my lawyer. My client complied with her request. I watched Judge Morrison's face carefully, and I swear I saw the tiniest hint of a smile threaten to break through her professional exterior. She picked up another document from her stack, read it for about 10 seconds, and then looked directly at Richard Chun. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. Your client sent a text message demanding a divorce and insisting on communication only through legal counsel. The respondent complied with that request and protected marital assets pending the divorce proceedings. And now your client is upset that the respondent followed her instructions. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Richard Chun opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and finally managed to say, "Your Honor, my client was in emotional distress when she sent that message. She didn't intend for. What she intended is irrelevant to what she communicated, Mr. Chun." Judge Morrison set down her papers and looked at Sarah directly. "Mrs. Peterson, did you or did you not send a text message to your husband requesting a divorce and demanding all communication go through attorneys?" Sarah stood up slowly, removing her oversized sunglasses in what I'm sure she thought was a dramatic reveal of her tear-stained face. Except her makeup was perfect and there was no evidence she'd been crying at all. "Yes, Your Honor, but I was emotional. I didn't mean." "I'm going to stop you right there," Judge Morrison said, holding up one hand. "Intent and emotional state don't change the content of written communication. You sent explicit instructions. Your husband followed them. That's not financial abuse. That's compliance." She looked back down at the papers in front of her, flipped through a few more pages, and I could practically see her piecing together the entire timeline in her head. "Mr. Langford, what is your client proposing in terms of temporary support?" Bruce stood up for the first time, and he moved like a man who'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Your Honor, given that my client has continued to provide for all basic necessities and that the petitioner has access to her own income, she works part-time as a yoga instructor, we believe temporary support should be minimal. We're proposing $1,500 per month, which is more than sufficient to cover any gaps in her budget while the divorce proceeds." "1,500? Richard Chun sputtered. "Your Honor, that's completely inadequate for. It's $1,500 more than she'd have if she'd actually been cut off, Mr. Chun," Judge Morrison said dryly. "Which, according to the evidence presented, she hasn't been." She made another note, closed the folder in front of her, and delivered what was probably the most satisfying 10 seconds of my entire life. "Motion for $6,000 per month in temporary support is denied. Temporary support is granted at $1,500 per month, effective immediately. Both parties will maintain the status quo regarding marital assets until the final divorce decree. Next case." And just like that, it was over. The gavel came down. Actually came down, just like in the movies. And Judge Morrison moved on to the next filing on her docket like she hadn't just completely demolished Sarah's entire strategy. I sat there for a second, processing what had just happened, and then looked over at Bruce. He was calmly gathering his papers, organizing them back into their color-coded folders, and I swear I saw his eye twitch from holding in laughter. "That was surgical," he whispered as we stood up to leave. "Clean cut," I agreed, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from grinning like an idiot in the middle of a courtroom. We walked out into the hallway, and I could hear Sarah's voice behind us, rising in pitch as she said something to Richard Chun that I couldn't quite make out, but definitely involved the words unfair and how could you. Bruce and I kept walking, not looking back, not engaging, just moving forward like we had somewhere important to be. Which we did lunch. Bruce had promised that if the hearing went well, he'd take me to this steakhouse downtown that he swore had the best ribeye in the city. She looked like she was auditioning for a role in a Lifetime movie. I said once we were safely in the elevator, away from the courtroom and anyone who might report back to Sarah's camp. "The sunglasses indoors were a bold choice," Bruce said, and now he was actually laughing. "I've seen a lot of courtroom theatrics in my career, Mark, but that was top 10, maybe top 5. Did you see the judge's face when she asked if Sarah had sent the text message?" "Oh, I saw it. Judge Morrison doesn't suffer fools gladly. And your wife just tried to argue that her own written communication shouldn't count because she had feelings." Bruce shook his head, still smiling. "That judge has probably presided over hundreds of divorce cases. She's heard every excuse in the book." I was emotional ranks pretty low on the sympathy scale. We got in Bruce's car, a Mercedes that definitely reflected his hourly rate, and drove to the steakhouse. The whole way there, I kept replaying the hearing in my head. Sarah's dramatic entrance, Richard Chin's increasingly desperate arguments, Judge Morrison's completely unimpressed expressions, the moment when she'd said, "Motion denied," and Sarah's face had crumpled like a paper bag. It shouldn't have felt good. I shouldn't have taken satisfaction in watching my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, get shut down in a courtroom. But I did. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because for once, the truth had actually mattered more than the performance. At the steakhouse, Bruce ordered wine, and we toasted to strategic victories and reasonable judges. The steak was as good as he'd promised, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt like maybe I wasn't just surviving this divorce. I was actually navigating it successfully. With my lawyer, my documentation, and my apparently boring but effective approach to conflict resolution. What happens now? I asked between bites of perfectly cooked meat that probably cost more than that grocery delivery I'd sent Sarah. Now we move forward with the actual divorce proceedings. Asset division, final support calculations, all the fun paperwork. Bruce cut his own steak, took a bite, and nodded approvingly at his lunch choice. But after today, I don't think they're going to fight us on much. Richard Chun knows his client lied to him about the groceries. The judge knows his client tried to weaponize communication preferences. They're not operating from a position of strength anymore. So basically we won. We won the first battle, Bruce corrected. The war isn't over yet. But yeah, today was a pretty decisive victory. I finished my steak, declined dessert because I wasn't trying to fall into a food coma before going back to work, and paid for lunch because Bruce had just saved me about $54,000 in annual support payments. When we left the restaurant and headed back toward downtown, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. The divorce wasn't over, but the hardest part, the part where Sarah tried to rewrite history and paint me as the villain, had just been shut down by a judge who'd seen through the performance in approximately 3 minutes. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. How'd court go? I typed back. Motion denied. Support capped at $1,500. Currently eating expensive steak with my lawyer. Legend. Told you Bruce was worth it. Yeah, he really was. After court, Lauren called again. Except this time her voice had that fake sweetness people use when they've realized they backed the wrong horse and need to save face. Mark, maybe we all overreacted a bit. You didn't have to be so cold about everything though. I wasn't cold, Lauren. I was room temperature, perfect for logic. I could practically hear her teeth grinding through the phone. She mumbled something about family and moved on, probably to call Sarah and report that I was still being difficult by having boundaries. Meanwhile, Sarah had taken to social media like a moth to a flame. Vague quotes appeared on her Instagram. Some people only show love when they lose you. Posted at 11 p.m. with a black and white filter and a candle emoji, because nothing says, "I'm deep and wounded," like stealing quotes from Pinterest and pretending they're profound personal revelations. I posted nothing. I was too busy enjoying my newfound freedom without someone monitoring my phone and asking, "Who's texting you at 10 p.m.?" Like I was running a classified operation instead of getting notifications from my fantasy football league. Even my coworkers noticed the change. Jim from the office stopped by my desk one afternoon and said, "Man, you look happier." Like, genuinely happier. Yeah, I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. Turns out silence is cheaper than therapy and way more effective. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Assets split 60/40ths in my favor because apparently keeping receipts and not lying to your lawyer pays dividends. I kept the house, the car, and my sanity. Sarah got her new apartment and an overdraft notification that probably made her reconsider some life choices. I redecorated immediately. Took down all the photos of us looking fake happy at various beach vacations where we'd argued about restaurant choices. Painted the bedroom a color that wasn't soothing sage or whatever trendy nonsense Sarah had insisted on. I turned it into something brighter, cleaner, mine. Then I did something completely unexpected. I adopted a cat. A big orange tabby from the shelter who I named Sir Meows-a-Lot, because if you're going to have a cat, you might as well commit to the bit. He provided less drama than my ex-wife, but the same judgmental stare, which was oddly comforting. I started jogging again, cooking actual meals again, living again. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. I was eating them. Scrambled, with cheese, on Sunday mornings while Sir Meows-a-Lot judged my technique from the counter. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. And honestly, I'd take peaceful over perfect any day. 6 months later, I got an email from Bruce that started with, "You're going to enjoy this," and included a forwarded message that I had to read 3 times to fully appreciate. It was from Richard Chun to Bruce, marked, "Off the record, professional courtesy." The email was short but absolutely golden. "Bruce, off the record, my client recently admitted that she didn't think your client would actually detach. She expected begging, pleading, maybe some grand gesture to win her back. The divorce text was meant to be a wake-up call, not an actual divorce. She's now dealing with the reality that he took her at her word and moved on completely. Thought you should know. Also, excellent work on the documentation. I've never seen someone so prepared for a divorce they didn't initiate." Richard. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, coffee halfway to my mouth, processing what I'd just read. She didn't think I'd actually detach. The divorce text was a test. A power play. One of those manipulative relationship moves where someone threatens something extreme, hoping the other person will panic and suddenly transform into whatever idealized version they'd been demanding. Except I hadn't panicked. I'd just said, "Understood," and started making strategic decisions like a functional adult. Bruce's response to me was even better. "Begging? From you? Please. The only thing you've begged for lately was a stronger Wi-Fi signal during that Teams meeting last month." He wasn't wrong. I'd had exactly one technical meltdown in the past 6 months, and it involved my router having an existential crisis, not my marriage ending. I replied to Bruce, "Tell him I appreciate the feedback. 5 stars. Would divorce again. Actually, no. Once was plenty, but you get the idea." Bruce sent back a laughing emoji, which was the most unprofessional thing I'd ever seen him do and somehow made the whole thing even better. We'd become friends over the course of this divorce, the kind of friendship that forms when someone helps you navigate the worst experience of your life with humor and competence and enough documentation to build a legal fortress. I forwarded the email chain to Mike with the message, "You were right about Bruce. Best decision I made besides saying understood." Mike replied immediately, "She thought you'd BG? Man, she really didn't know you at all. Want to grab drinks this weekend and celebrate your excellent life choices?" I told him yes, closed my laptop, and went to feed Sir Meows-a-Lot, who was staring at me with that expression that either meant, "I'm hungry," or "I'm judging your life choices," or possibly both simultaneously. The cat had become an excellent listener, mostly because he couldn't talk back and offer unsolicited advice. People still ask me about the divorce. Not in that nosy, gossipy way where they're fishing for drama to share at book club or happy hour. More in that genuinely curious way where they're trying to understand how someone goes from divorce texted at 8:12 a.m. to actually, legitimately happy 6 months later. The question usually comes in some variation of, "Do you miss her?" Or "Do you ever think about getting back together?" Or my personal favorite, "Don't you feel bad about how it all went down?" My answer is always the same, and I've perfected the delivery to the point where I don't even have to think about it anymore. Sure, I miss her, like I miss dial-up internet. The comparison is perfect because it's true on multiple levels. Do I technically remember dial-up internet? Yes. Was it part of my life at one point? Absolutely. Would I ever, under any circumstances, want to go back to that screeching modem sound and waiting 17 minutes for a single image to load? Absolutely not. That's exactly how I feel about my marriage. It existed. It was fine for a while, or at least I thought it was fine. But now that I've experienced the high-speed connection of living alone with my cat and my blue walls and zero drama, there's no universe in which I'd downgrade back to that old system. The truth is, Sarah wanted to make it legal, so I made it logistical. She wanted the divorce to be this big emotional event where I'd fight for her or beg her to reconsider or prove that I loved her enough to transform into whatever fantasy version of a husband she'd created in her head. Instead, I gave her exactly what she asked for, a divorce. Clean, efficient, documented, and final. She wanted control of the narrative, wanted to be the one calling the shots and making the decisions. I gave her silence. The most powerful kind of control is the kind you don't fight for. You just step back and let someone else struggle with the consequences of their own choices. She wanted a reaction, tears, anger, some kind of emotional display she could point to and say, see, this is why we're getting divorced. He's so dramatic. Or he doesn't even care. He's so cold. I gave her receipts instead. Bank statements, grocery delivery confirmations, text message screenshots with timestamps. Every single piece of documentation that proved I'd done exactly what she'd asked, exactly when she'd asked for it, with no deviation and no drama. You can't argue with receipts. You can try, but you'll just end up looking ridiculous, which is exactly what happened in that courtroom when Judge Morrison looked at Sarah over those reading glasses and essentially said, "You asked for this. You got this. Motion denied." The thing about divorce, or any major life change, really, is that people expect you to be broken by it. They expect the crying and the late-night phone calls and the social media posts about healing and growth and finding yourself. They expect you to download dating apps and start going to therapy and join a gym and do all the things that signal you're working on yourself in the aftermath of relationship failure. And maybe some people need that. Maybe some people actually are broken by divorce and need time and space and professional help to put themselves back together. But I wasn't broken. I was just done. There's a difference. Broken implies something that was whole and functional got damaged. Done implies you finished something that had run its course and you're ready to move on to the next thing. I didn't need to heal from my marriage. I just needed to close that chapter and start writing a new one, which is exactly what I did. New paint colors, new furniture, new cat, new routines, new appreciation for the simple pleasure of eating pizza from the box without commentary about refined carbohydrates or the importance of balanced meals. Now when I walk out of a room, I turn off the lights. Not because I'm bitter or making some passive-aggressive statement about our failed relationship. I turn off the lights because it's cheaper on the electric bill and it's the responsible thing to do, and also because it's beautifully symbolic in a way that makes me smile every single time. I'm not leaving the lights on for someone who's not coming back. I'm not wasting energy on empty spaces. I'm just moving through my house, my actual house that's actually mine, and managing it like a functional adult who understands basic home economics. Because when you're truly done, and I mean actually done, not the dramatic, "I'm so done," that people say when they're still very much emotionally invested. You don't argue. You don't cry. You don't post vague quotes on social media about strength and betrayal and becoming the person you were meant to be. You don't need to convince anyone of anything or prove that you're fine or demonstrate that you've moved on. You just exist in your new reality with your cat and your comfortable couch and your freedom to watch whatever you want on TV without negotiation. You smile when you remember the absurdity of it all. The grocery wars, the courtroom theatrics, the panicked voicemail from a lawyer who realized his client had lied to him about organic produce. You take deep breaths that aren't weighed down by anxiety or tension or the constant feeling that you're somehow doing everything slightly wrong. You let the lawyers do the talking because that's literally what you're paying them for, and they're much better at it than you'd ever be. And you move forward, not in some grand, transformative way that'll become an inspirational story people share at divorce support groups. Just forward. One day at a time, one room at a time, one light switch at a time. Done, dusted, and delightfully petty in all the small ways that make you smile. Sir Meows a lot meowed from his spot on the couch, probably wondering why I was standing in the kitchen staring into space instead of feeding him dinner. I turned off the kitchen light, walked into the living room, and sat down next to my judgmental orange cat who'd seen me through the weirdest 6 months of my life without offering a single piece of unsolicited advice. "You hungry, buddy?" I asked. He stared at me with those unblinking cat eyes that somehow conveyed both supreme indifference and mild approval. "Yeah, life was good,"